Chapter 909. Tell me, do you know the younger sister of the Shao family? Mrs. Fong looked at old Sue and asked with an aggressive gaze. Old Sue secretly glanced at Fong. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He trembled and said, Mrs. Fong put her hands on her hips and said angrily, "You what? Tell me." Fong sighed. As soon as he took a step forward, he heard a sigh. The woman next to Mrs. Fong sighed and said, "Cousin, don't worry. I won't cause any trouble for your family. I'll go back in a few days." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone present was dumbfounded. Old Fong pursed his lips in confusion, while old Sue stood rooted to the ground in a daze. Mrs. Fong was the first to react. She pointed at old Sue and asked the woman, "Sister, is he the distant cousin you mentioned?" The woman nodded and said, "If it weren't for the disaster in my hometown, Mrs. Fong was already furious. She pointed at old Sue and scolded, "You heartless man. You forgot your poor relatives when you got rich. Sister, you'll stay with us from now on. We won't trouble this heartless guy." No matter how stupid old Sue was, he still reacted at this moment. He smiled apologetically and said, "Sister-in-law, what are you talking about? Didn't I go to Qing in prefecture recently? I just missed little Hong. Since I'm back, I naturally can't trouble you anymore." Mrs. Fong ignored her. She took her arm and said, "Let's go, sister." "Ignore them. Let's go back and try on the new clothes." After saying that, she glanced at Fong and stopped in her tracks. She asked, "Why are you sweating so much?" Fong wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked up. He sighed and said, "The sun is so hot today. My eyes are sweating." Mississippi Lou looked away and said in surprise, "I've been in the village for so many years. Why haven't I heard that old Sue has any distant cousins?" Li glanced at her and said, "If he says he does, then he does. Why are you worrying about him?" Mississippi Lou turned to look at him. Her expression did not change, but her grip on her sword tightened. Li touched his forehead. I have to think carefully. When are we going to the Wu Kingdom to visit my martial nephew?" Her chest heaved a few times, and a moment later, a forced smile appeared on her face. "I'm going to the League to train the newbies. I'll be back later." The reason why the martial arts practitioners who joined the Lu League improved so quickly was that there were many masters in the league. After accumulating enough points, they could exchange for pointers from these masters. Of course, if these masters were in a good mood, they would also train the newcomers for free. Mississippi Lou was obviously in a bad mood. Although she did not know the reason, the newcomers in the league must be careful. When he was about to go out, a servant of the Li family came to report that Lord Liu of the Ministry of Justice had come to visit. Liu Yi had been investigating an important case recently, and he must have made some progress. He gave up the idea of going out, poured 2 cups of tea, and sat down in the hall. Lord Li. After Liu Yi came in, he first cupped his hands and bowed to him. At Li Yi's signal, he sat across from him. Li Yi raised his teacup and asked, "Has there been progress on that case?" Liu Yi nodded. "I've had people follow Qin Yu for the past few days. Lord Li's guess is correct. There is indeed something wrong with the Qin family." "What did you find out?" "Outside the capital, a manor owned by the Qin family under Qin Yan's name. There are some problems." Liu Yi's eyes were sharp. "The manor is heavily guarded. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in. It doesn't look like a private garden for recreation at all. Usually, the people who enter and leave the manor are the nobles of the capital. The more it is so, the more suspicious it is." Li Yi was surprised. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in? Although there were no masters of the Grandmaster level in the Secret Service, there were many guests who were only a step away from the Grandmaster level. If even the masters of the Secret Service couldn't sneak in, it could be seen how heavily guarded the manor was. In the entire capital, perhaps only the Imperial Palace and the Department of Heavenly Punishment could compare. Liu Yi shook his head. He thought of something and said, "In the process of investigating Qin Yu, I discovered some suspicious points." "What suspicious points?" Liu Yi thought for a moment. "Lord Li, do you know that a few years ago, Qin Yu raped his own aunt and committed the crime of incest, causing the capital to denounce him?" Li nodded. "I heard that the woman he raped couldn't bear the humiliation and committed suicide." Later on, the Qin family suppressed the matter. Even though Prime Minister Qin is the current Minister of the Right, he has no way of influencing the people. How could the Qin family suppress the matter? Lu Yi shook his head and said, "In this matter, the Chui family used the power of the king of Shu and countless dignitaries in the capital to suppress this rebellious matter. Even the empress in the palace contributed a lot." Li knew that Lu Yi would not bring up this matter for no reason, so he waited for him to continue. The woman he raped was named Lin Lian. Before entering the Qin family, she was a slightly famous actress in the capital. Later on, she caught the eye of Prime Minister Qin's fifth son, Qin He. Not long after he took her in as a concubine, that incident happened. Lin Lian is actually not the girl's real name. She was just a disciple of a performer with the surname Lin in the capital. She changed her surname after she became her master. That Lin Lian passed away a long time ago, and the disciples she took in her lifetime all had different experiences. That Miss Lin Lian is the oldest of her disciples and has inherited her acting skills. Her youngest disciple has completely inherited her skills in the art of the zither and has even surpassed her. She is extremely famous in the capital. Li Yi sighed and said, "Her youngest disciple, the girl with outstanding skills on the Guqin, her stage name is Lin Shuang, right?" Lu Yi nodded and said, "Yes, it is the deceased Lin Shuang. Lin Qin, who reported to the Ministry of Justice, is also their sister." The common people only know that Chu Ping killed Lin Shuang, but they have overlooked one thing. Lin Shuang was already seriously ill. Even without that incident, she only had a few months to live. Lu Yi shook his head and said, "This is not all suspicious." Official Zheng said that there was no such thing as a criminal. This matter was originally a trap set up by the Chui family for the Chu family. The Chui family bribed Lin Shuang in advance, but their original intention was not to use Lin Shuang's death to threaten the Chu family. That night, someone saw the fifth master of the Qin family, Qin He, in a restaurant across from the Fine Sound Pavilion drunk. Official Zheng once said that when there are too many coincidences, it is no longer a coincidence. Li shook his head and said, "So this was not a trap set up by the Chui family for the Chu family." Lu Yi looked at him and nodded. This was a trap set up by someone for the Chui family and the Chu family. If the Chu family is crippled, the Chui family will lose an arm. Lu Yi put down his teacup and said, "Although Prime Minister Qin has not had much contact with the Chui family in this past year, the relationship between the two families cannot be severed. If something happens to the Qin family, the Chui family will really lose an arm." He raised his head and muttered, "This fifth Master Qin, what does he want to do?" The Fong family. The wife of the Fong family and the girl walked into the house arm in arm. Fong came in carrying bags of various sizes. "Close the door," the wife of the Fong family suddenly said. "It's broad daylight. Why close the door?" Fong muttered. He put down the things in his hands and closed the door. The wife of the Fong family let go of the girl's hand and looked at the two of them. With a cold expression, she asked, "When did you start?" Chapter 9-10. Fong's face changed. He raised his head and opened his mouth, but he didn't say anything. When the woman heard this, her body trembled, and her face turned pale in an instant. She looked at Fong Lushi and said in panic, "Sister, don't." Fong Lushi waved her hand and said, "Don't call me that. I don't have a sister like you." Little Red's lips moved, but before she could say the next word, a mountain-like figure had already stood in front of her. Fong looked up at his wife and said in a low voice, "It's all my idea. Blame me." Fong Lushi pointed her finger at him and said in a trembling voice, You really have an affair?" Fong Lushi was stunned and looked at her in disbelief. "You just tricked me." "Well, you're really capable." Fong Lushi picked up the broom on the side and fiercely whipped him. "You brought a fox spirit to our house, but you're still in the right, aren't you?" Little Red's eyes were full of tears. She desperately stood in front of Fong and cried, "Sister, don't hit Fong Lushi. If you want to hit him, hit me. It's all my fault. I seduced him." Fong Liushi's broom didn't fall. She collapsed on the ground and cried. Why is my life so bitter? I can't live like this anymore. Fong Liushir's face showed a painful expression. He scratched his hair hard and then loosened it powerlessly. Li Yi and Lu Yi walked out of the mansion. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, "After all, it's a serious matter. If we don't have enough evidence, we can't do anything. I'll ask them to keep an eye on it and try to get some useful clues." "Don't bother." Li Yi waved to the sloppy old man not far away and said, "Sue, I need your help with something. 10 drumsticks." The sloppy old man had recently understood that white rabbit creamy candies was not a long-term solution. Under the influence of his second granduncle, he had a special liking for drumsticks. This was not the only thing he had learned from his second granduncle. Yesterday, he had even asked Li Yi to make him a rocking chair that was exactly the same as his second granduncle's. Li nodded. "Deal." It was just cooking once. Xiao Huan's body was still growing during this period of time. She should eat more good food to nourish herself. After 2 years, it would be difficult to nourish herself again. The sloppy old man glanced at Lu Yichang. "What are you waiting for? Let's go." Lu Yi looked at him. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "If there's anything, tell Sue. You guys just have to wait for the news." Grandmasters could be said to be the pinnacle of martial artists. Ordinary martial artists could only be found but not sought after. Using them to gather information was definitely a waste of their talents. After sending them off, when he was about to walk back, he saw a figure squatting in the corner with his head buried between his knees. There was no sound at all. Li looked around, walked over, and asked in confusion, "What's wrong now? Didn't you make it clear just now?" Fong raised his head and said in a hoarse voice, "Xiao Hong is gone." Li Yi was stunned. He looked at him and asked tentatively, "Your wife knows?" Fong nodded. Li Yi squatted down beside him and wanted to say some comforting words. When the words were about to come out, they only turned into a sigh. "Don't be anxious about this kind of thing. Let's take it slow." Fong raised his head and looked at him with burning eyes. He asked, "Young master, am I too much of a jerk?" After that, he lowered his head and shook his head. "No, I shouldn't ask you this question. The problem that Fong encountered could only be solved by himself. No one else could help or intervene. Li Yi's own affairs were even more complicated. They needed to be done step by step and cannot be rushed. Beast, he's a beast." The sloppy old man came in from outside angrily. Li Yi was worried that he would get angry and tear down the house. He hurriedly stood up and asked, "What happened?" The sloppy old man was still angry. "That place is a devil's den. I've lived for a long time, but I've never seen such a crazy person. The owner of that place should be killed by 1,000 cuts. If it weren't for Lu's repeated orders yesterday, I would have massacred that devil's den." Lu Yi followed behind and said in a low voice, "Your Excellency, it's almost certain that those missing women are related to the Qin family. The previous Peng family should have set up a trap for Chu Ping. That place is the root of evil." Li looked at him. "That place and the Peng family." Lu Yi gritted his teeth. "It's the same place. I've already sent people to the Secret Intelligence Office to send more people. There's no time to lose. We need to act immediately." Lu Yi said a few words in a hurry. Someone from the Secret Intelligence Office came to report and left in a hurry. After the sloppy old man sat down, he gulped down a few mouthfuls of tea and recounted everything he had seen last night. The women tied up in the room were obviously different from the prostitutes outside. They no longer knew how to resist. Their eyes were empty and vacant, and they could only be manipulated. When the sloppy old man said this, he crushed 3 cups and smashed a wooden table. Li Yi had taken away the precious purple clay teapot in time to avoid this disaster. He shook his head and said, "The Secret Intelligence Office has already mobilized all their forces. Calm down and wait for the news." As soon as he finished speaking, Fong walked in from outside in a daze. He looked at Li Yi and said in a daze, "Young master, Little Red is missing." Li Yi said in surprise, "Missing? She didn't return to the Jade Courtyard?" Fong shook his head and said, "No, I asked the madam. She said that Little Red hasn't returned since she left last time." Li Yi thought for a moment and asked again, "What about Drunken Ink?" Fong looked anxious. I went there too. Little Chui said she didn't go there either. She didn't go back last night. She didn't bring any money with her. She doesn't know anyone in the capital. Where could she go? Don't worry. He said as he walked out of the door. Think about it first. Where else could she have gone? I'll ask the brothel and the government to inquire about the news. Outside the door, Fong Liushir's face was pale, and her expression was extremely remorseful. Seeing Fong come out, she went to greet him and wanted to say something. But Fong just glanced at her and left in a hurry. In the Qin family, Qin Yin looked at his son who walked in from outside and asked with a sullen face, "You didn't return last night. What did you do?" "I went to find a friend to drink." Qin Yin looked drunk. He shook his head and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll go back to my room first. I'm sleepy, this bastard." Qin Yin looked at his swaying back and forth as he left. He waved his hand and shook his head helplessly. Has everything been taken care of? Passing through a moon door, Qin Yu's drunkenness disappeared, and he asked in a low voice. The person beside him immediately said, "Little Duke, don't worry. The person has been moved. This time, they'll definitely come empty-handed." A bunch of idiots. Qin Yu twitched the corner of his mouth, and then a trace of coldness appeared on his face. He murmured, Count Marquis Li, Dr. Li, I'll see how long you can be proud for." The coldness flashed across his face, and he asked again, "That woman last night?" The person nodded repeatedly. "She's been sent to your room." Qin Yu didn't speak again. He walked to the door and pushed it open. Seeing the empty room, his face instantly darkened. Where is she? Chapter 9:11. Little Red had disappeared. Not only had Li Yi made arrangement for the brothel, but he had also informed the county government and even the Secret Intelligence Office. They had already acted quickly. All they could do now was wait. There was no news, but Liu Yi soon came. There's a traitor in the Secret Intelligence Office. Liu Yi's face was as calm as still water. He said slowly, "When we brought people there were no traces left. There were only a few servants of the Qin family, but they had something on them. After all, that was the house of an important official in the court. It's a bit troublesome." Li looked at him and asked, "You didn't find any clues at all?" Liu Yi shook his head. "One night is enough for them to move the people away. Other clues are not enough to be used as evidence. There are people watching the surroundings, and there are no suspicious people coming in or out. There should be a secret passage inside, but we have no reason to search it now." "What about the traitor?" Li Yi asked. "He committed suicide." Liu Yi shook his head and said, "That person has been in the Secret Intelligence Office for nearly 20 years. When we found him, he bit the poison sac and didn't say a word." "I see." He nodded and asked again, "Do you know which family the carriages that go in and out usually belong to?" "There are records of them," Liu Yi replied, then raised his head and said, "But sir, with just these, I'm afraid it's difficult to form evidence. Moreover, those people are all nobles in the capital, and their status is extraordinary." Li Yi waved his hand. "These are enough." The Secret Intelligence Office had a special status in the court, but it was still troublesome to encounter such things. Liu Yi would have a headache later. Breaking into a private house was not a big deal in other places, but this was the capital, and everything had to be done according to the law. Moreover, the court had changed the law not long ago against the opposition of countless nobles. If the court protected the Secret Intelligence Office breaking into an official's house, it would undoubtedly be contradictory. It would give those people a reason, and maybe something more serious would happen. To be honest, even Li Yi himself didn't expect that they could plant people in the Secret Intelligence Office. He had to admit that he had underestimated the Chui family. This time, Liu Yi had returned without any results. They would definitely be more careful and even stop all actions. If they wanted to collect evidence through normal channels, it would be very difficult. Crack. In the end, Li Yi did not manage to keep the teapot. "You didn't find him?" The sloppy old man slammed his palm on the new table, causing it to shatter. The teapot on top of it also fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. "Are they messing with me?" The anger on the sloppy old man's face didn't last long. He quickly revealed a smile, stroked his beard, and muttered, "Interesting, interesting." How many years has it been since I've encountered something so interesting? The smile on his face was like that of a benevolent elder, but the servant girl who came in to clean up the mess couldn't help but shiver. She felt her body was a little cold, and her hands moved a little faster. Chui family. Chui Qingming sighed and said, "What a pity. In the past 20 years, there was only one spy left in the secret intelligence office. Now, there's no one left," someone beside him comforted. "Second brother, there's no need to sigh. As the saying goes, there's no gain without loss. Although we've lost that spy, the secret intelligence office recklessly intruded into an official's residence. This is not a small crime. The imperial court has reformed the law, and it can't be overturned. With Liu Yi around, the Ministry of Justice is almost unable to interfere. If we get rid of him, it will be much more convenient to do things in the future." Chui Qingming nodded and said, "Let them be prepared. This time, if we don't pull Liu Yi down completely, we won't rest." The Chui clan hated Liu Yi to the bone. At that time, it was precisely because of Liu Yi's meddling that caused all their arrangements and deployments towards the Chu clan to turn into ash. The Chu clan had fallen, and the Chui clan had lost an arm. If this matter were to implicate the Qin clan and those people, then they would really arrive at the end of their rope. At this point, they almost understood that it was unlikely for His Majesty to summon the king of Shu back. But if the status quo was maintained, it might not be a bad thing for them. Once His Majesty passed away, who was more suitable than the king of Shu in terms of identity and status when the position of the Eastern Palace was vacant? If it really came to that, it would be much easier for them to do things. Chui Qingming showed a sarcastic smile and said, "I really want to see with my own eyes what expression County Marquis Li has now." Li Yi was naturally anxious, but it was not because of the secret intelligence office. As long as he knew the facts, the evidence was not important. What he was worried about was that if something really happened to Little Red, Old Fong's family would be ruined. However, the brothel and the government were not omnipotent. Even if they were to find clues, it would take time. Instead of searching around like a headless fly, it was better to wait here. Some people of the Chui family were also anxious. "Little Duke, I've asked the front and back doors, and no strange woman came in or out. That woman must be hiding somewhere in the mansion. If you look hard, you can definitely find her." Qin Yu glanced at him coldly and said, "Go and look for her. Go and look for her in every room in the mansion." The servant was stunned and asked again, "Go and look for her in every room." Prime Minister and the Masters. Qin Yu kicked him and said, "Except for those few, don't let anyone go." In a remote and messy woodshed in Qin's mansion, a woman looked at the figure covered in a black cloak and said gratefully, "Thank you for saving me, my benefactor." "Little Red, why are you here?" A hoarse voice came from the black cloak. It was not difficult to tell that it was a woman's voice. "I was caught by them," the woman replied. Then she realized something and asked in shock, How? How do you know my name is Little Red?" The person in the black cloak put down the hood of her cloak. It was an ordinary-looking woman, but there was a long scar on her face, which looked a little scary. The woman looked at her and said, "I went down the mountain with Uncle Fong and saw you on the road." Little Red's expression was a little excited. She grabbed her sleeve and asked, You know Big Brother Fong?" The woman with the long scar on her face did not answer this question. Instead, she looked at her and said, "This place is very remote. They can't find this place. You hide here first. I'll think of a way to spread the news." As soon as she finished speaking, there was a sudden urgent knock on the door. The woman's expression changed. She hurriedly let Little Red hide in a large vat and threw her black cloak inside. She carried a bundle of firewood and walked to the door. She asked, "Who is it?" "The firewood is not ready yet." "Wait a moment," a rough voice came from outside the door. "Open the door. The community sends warmth." Chapter 9:12. Hearing the voice outside, the woman with the scar on her face calmed down a bit and asked, "Wu, brother Wu? It's me, Xiao Mei. Open the door. There's not enough time." Wu Er's voice came from outside. Lu Mei opened the door and looked at the man outside. She asked in confusion, "What's not enough time?" "There's not enough time to explain." Wu Er closed the door and said, "Hurry," and called the girl out. "Those people are coming." As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of messy footsteps could be heard. Lu Mei's expression changed greatly. Wu Er closed the door and grabbed her arm. He said in a low voice, "Let's go. I'll tell you in detail later." Search. A group of Qin family guards kicked open the door of the woodshed and searched inside and out. They also looked at the woodpile, water tanks, and other places where people could hide, but they didn't find anything. The leader waved his hand and said, "Search other places." Qin Manor, back residence. Wu Er led the two of them through the narrow path between the rock garden and the wall. Lu Mei hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask, "Brother Wu, how did you know? Now is not the time to talk about this." Wu Er quickly said, "They're searching the entire Qin Manor. It's not safe to hide there. I'll take you to a safe place." Xiao Hong followed and said in a weak voice, "Thank you, big brother. No need to thank me." Wu Er smiled and said, "If you want to thank someone, thank Fifth Lord. Otherwise, such a beautiful girl would have been defiled by that beast Qin Yu again." The three of them were in a deserted garden in the Qin family. The weeds were as tall as a person, and they followed the narrow path between the rock garden. They didn't encounter anyone along the way. Somewhere, Wu Er pushed open a small door. After the three of them walked in and closed it from the inside, he let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Okay, we're safe now." The small door was clearly the back door of a house. Wu Er took the two of them to the front yard. A middle-aged man was already standing there waiting. Wu Er walked over and said with a smile, "Fifth Lord, I've brought the girl." Fifth Lord nodded and looked at the girl. "I'm afraid it's not easy to send you out from here. Do you have any family in the capital?" Xiao Hong thought for a moment and was about to speak. She paused and said after a long time, "Just tell the Madam of Jade Courtyard that I'm here and she will know what to do." Fifth Lord shook his head and said, "If that's all, I'm afraid it won't work. Miss doesn't know where this place is. Open the door, open the door." Suddenly, the sound of knocking came from outside the courtyard. The knocking was so forceful that it seemed like the entire door was going to crack. Qin Clan's fifth master glanced at Wu Er, who immediately understood. He walked over and whispered, "Follow me." The fifth master of the Qin family walked to the door and opened it. He asked, "Why did you use so much force?" Fifth Lord, the head guard, first casually greeted him and said, "A servant girl in the mansion ran away, and now the whole mansion is being searched. Of course, we're not suspecting Fifth Lord, but just doing a routine search. Fifth Lord, you don't mind, right?" The fifth master of the Qin family waved his hand and said, "Go ahead. Be careful and don't break anything." They swaggered in. The fifth master of the Qin family stood in the yard and watched them rummaging in the yard. When they went back into the house, he hurriedly followed them and said, "Be careful. If you break anything, you can't afford to pay for it." They didn't dare to be too arrogant. After searching for a while, the leader knocked on a wall on the inside and pushed it hard. He asked, "There won't be a secret door here, right?" Fifth Master Qin smiled. "How could it be?" Unable to find anything here, the guard waved his hand. "Let's go to the next place." Fifth Master Qin followed them out. After closing the door, he walked back. He knocked on the wall that the guard had pushed 3 times, paused for a moment, and then hurriedly knocked 3 more times. A moment later, a heavy sound came from behind the wall, and the wall slowly turned to an angle. Wu Er came out from behind the wall, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and complained, "Fifth Master, this wall really needs to be repaired. It's so hard to switch it on and off." Fifth Master Qin waved his hand and said, "Sit down and rest for a while." Wu Er sat down at the table, picked up a teapot, and gulped down a mouthful of tea. Then he asked, "Fifth Master, we saved Miss Hong. What should we do now? It's impossible for us to send her out alone." Fifth Master Qin shook his head, looked at him, and said, "Go find this girl's family and report it to the authorities." "Ah!" Wu Er was stunned and said, "Report to the authorities? But Fifth Master, this is the Qin family. We should have a bottom line." Fifth Master Qin looked at him, shook his head, and said, "What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. This has nothing to do with whether I'm a member of the Qin family or not." "Fifth Master, you." Wu Er stood up with a solemn expression. He bowed to him and said, "You're really a good person. It's just for justice." Wu Er nodded and asked, "Which official should I report to? The capital magistrate or the capital governor?" Fifth Master Qin looked at him, smiled, and said, "Report whichever one you like. I believe you know what to do." Wu Er patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, Fifth Master. I won't let you down." Wu Er strode out. Fifth Master Qin looked at the two of them and said, "I'm afraid you'll have to suffer for a while." The two women thanked him repeatedly. Fifth Master Qin looked behind him and saw that the gambling wall was still tilted. He walked over and shook his head, saying, "This Wu Er is always careless and forgets to close it again." He stretched out a hand and closed the wall until it was seamless. Then he walked over, looked at the two women, smiled, and said, "It's still early. What do you want to drink? Tea or something else? The county government or the prefecture government?" On a street somewhere in the capital, Wu Er looked up, murmured, and stepped into a mansion. He said to the guard at the door, "Find Lord Li in the courtyard of the Li mansion." Fong Lucier looked at Fong with a regretful expression. "It's all my fault. If it weren't for me, she wouldn't have left." Fong squatted on the ground, sighed, and shook his head, saying, "It's not your fault. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have hidden it from you." Fong Lucier lowered her head and said, If she can come back, you can do whatever you want." If he had heard this earlier, he would have been extremely excited, but at this moment, he couldn't bring himself to think about it at all. "Hey Fong, long time no see." A figure came in from outside and looked at Fong. He first greeted him with a smile, and then asked, "Is Lord Li here?" Fong waved his hand and said in a hoarse voice, "Inside." Hearing the voice outside, Li Yi had already come out. When he saw Wu Er, he asked in surprise, "Why are you here?" "I'm here to report a case." Wu Er touched his head and said with a smile, "Qin, you took a girl back. Fifth Master and I secretly saved her. We couldn't send her out, so Fifth Master asked me to come out and report the case." "Took a girl?" "Yes." Wu Er nodded and said, "This time the evidence is conclusive. He can't run away, but we still have to go to the Jade Courtyard." The girl said that only the Madam of the Jade Courtyard can report the case. The Madam of the Jade Courtyard? Fong's body trembled. He suddenly got up and ran over quickly. He grabbed Wu Er's arm and asked, "What's the name of the girl you mentioned?" Wu Er scratched his head. I think her name is Xiaohong." The tight string in Fong's heart finally loosened, and he slumped to the ground. When Fong Lucier hurried to help him, he seemed to remember something and asked, "What did you say just now?" "If Xiaohong can come back." Fong Lucier looked puzzled. "What did I say just now?" Chapter 9:13. Yesterday, the Secret Intelligence Division broke into an official's residence. Today, there were many impeachment memorials. This organization had always had a mixed reputation. At a critical moment, there was no lack of people hitting someone when they were down. The court was in turmoil. Even if there were clues, they couldn't break into the minister's residence again. After the capital's magistrate, Liu Dayo, received the report from the Madam of the Jade Courtyard, he considered the special nature of this case and asked the princess as quickly as possible. After receiving the order to search the Qin Manor, he rushed over with the bailiffs of the county yamen. Among the many bailiffs, the person leading them was a burly man. His face was filled with anxiety as he urged the bailiffs to hurry up. "Li Manor." Wu Er scratched his head and said to Li Yi, "My lord, if there's nothing else, I'll be going back first." Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at him, and asked, "How did Qin he know that Qin you captured a girl and brought her into the manor?" "I don't know either." Wu Er shook his head and said, "Fifth Lord only told me to save Xiao Mei and that girl. I don't know how Fifth Lord found out about this." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "I'm afraid he already knows about you. You don't need to go back. Haven't you always wanted to go to the Lumang? You can go there now." Wu Er smiled and said, "There's no hurry. I still want to go back. Maybe I can be of some use." Li Yi hesitated for a moment and nodded. "Next, there may be some unrest in the Qin family. Be careful." "I know." Wu Er nodded. "I'll be going back first." In front of the Qin Manor, Liu Dayo politely bowed to Qin Yin and said, "This is an important matter. This official has already asked the princess. Please cooperate, my Lord Qin. Qin Yan's expression was unsightly as he questioned. Yesterday, the Secret Intelligence Division barged into the Qin residence, but Lord Liu actually brought bailiffs here today to arrest people. What kind of place do you think the Qin residence is? Is it a place that you can enter and search as you please? The expression on Liu Daio's face was very polite. He said again, there are witnesses who saw that after the young lady was kidnapped, she entered the backyard of Qin Manor. It's not that I don't believe you, Lord Qin, but this case is really too important. It's also related to another big case that even His Majesty is very concerned about. I really have no choice but to do this. Let them search. Qin Yan wanted to say something else, but an elderly voice came from behind him. Qin Xiang waved his hand. There was no joy or anger on his face. Since it wasn't done by the Qin family, what harm is there in searching? But if we let them enter, where would the face of my Qin family be? He retorted. Seeing that Qin Xiang's face was still expressionless, he gloomily looked at Liu Daio and said, Lord Liu, this official can let you in. If you can find that woman in my Qin residence today, I, Qin Yin, have nothing to say. If you can't find her, then tomorrow in court, Lord Liu will have already prepared an excuse. Thank you, Lord Qin. Liu Daio cupped his hands and turned his head to order, this is the Qin residence. You can search, but do not act rashly. Under the lead of the large man, more than 10 bailiffs filed in. Trash, how could there not be? Could it be that she can grow wings and fly out of the residence? Qin Yu's face was gloomy as he coldly asked. A Qin family servant shivered and said, Little High Duke, other than the Prime Minister's room, we've already searched the entire Qin residence, inside and out. We really haven't found that woman. It's possible that she really has escaped. Escaped? What do you think this Qin residence is? Qin Yu suddenly threw the teacup over. The servant let the teacup hit his head and didn't dare to dodge. He didn't even dare to wipe the blood that flowed down. At this time, another person ran in from outside in a panic and said in panic, Little High Duke, it's bad. The government has come to the Qin residence to search. They said that we've captured a woman. Qin Yu coldly glanced at that person. When you captured her yesterday, did someone see you? That person's expression changed. No. Qin Yu thought for a moment, waved his hand, and said, if they want to search, then let them search. The Qin family's servant raised his head and asked carefully, Little High Duke, what if they really find her? Qin Yu looked at him coldly. If they really find her, I'll chop you up and feed you to the dogs. Wu Er hurriedly walked into the room and said, Fifth Master, the capital magistrate has brought people over. Fifth Master Qin glanced at him and asked, Why are you back? Wu Er said in surprise, I came back after reporting to the government. Where else can I go? Fifth Master Qin's gaze stayed on his face for a moment and said, Forget it, it's not important. The two girls have gone out from the back door. The county government's bailiffs will find them. He clasped his hands behind his back and walked out of the courtyard. Wu Er asked in surprise, Fifth Master, where are you going? Going out for a walk. Fifth Master Qin didn't look back but waved his hand behind him. I'll walk alone. You don't have to follow me this time. Wu Er stopped. After touching his head, he nodded and said, Okay. The bailiffs searched carefully in Qin's mansion. They were very patient in the face of some uncooperative people. After all, this was Qin's mansion. Even if Lord Liu didn't specifically instruct them, they didn't dare to act rashly. However, many servants of Qin's mansion looked at them from a distance, pointing at the group of people and talking. Wu Er walked over leisurely with his hands behind his back. He pointed at the bailiffs and said, This is the yard of the second master. How can there be people hiding here? Be careful. Don't break anything. You can't afford to pay for it. The leading man's face darkened. He pointed in a direction and said, Go over there and find them. Over there. That's the residence of the third master. The third master is a fifth-level official in the imperial court. He's very honest. It's impossible for him to hide people. Go over there. That's the residence of the servants. You can go if you want. Anyway, I don't think it's a good place to hide people. The leading man looked back at him and asked, Then where do you think it's a good place to hide people? Wu Er shook his head and glanced in a certain direction. Then how do I know? The leading man pointed at that place and asked, "What's that place?" "That place." Ware glanced at it and shook his head. "I don't know." After saying that, he walked away leisurely. The leading man suddenly waved his hand and pointed in that direction. Search. In a deserted garden in the backyard of Chin's mansion, the bailiffs found two women behind a rockery. When one of the women saw the man dressed as a bailiff, her face lit up with joy. She took 2 quick steps forward and then stopped. She knelt on the ground and said in a loud voice, "Your Excellency, you must seek justice for me." Seeing this scene, the expressions of the people of Chin's family who followed them changed greatly. Some people in the distance looked even more frightened. They had searched this place many times just now. There was no one at all. "Little Duke, it's bad." They found the woman in the backyard. A servant of Chin's family rushed into Chin Yu's residence and said in a panic. Chin Yu clenched his fists and his face was extremely gloomy. The servant said anxiously, "Little Duke, it's better to hide first. You won't be able to leave in a while." Chin Yu looked outside, loosened his clenched fists, and turned into the backyard. In the capital, when night gradually fell, a dry well in the courtyard of a house 2 streets away from Chin's mansion suddenly lit up with a faint light. The rope tied to a tree outside the well swayed for a long time before a figure climbed out of the well with difficulty. He looked back at the well and said in a low voice, "Hurry up. Take advantage of the darkness to go to the Chui family." In the courtyard, a figure who had been sitting for a long time sighed. "Why did you come so late? I've been waiting for you for a long time." Chin Yu suddenly turned his head. "Who is it?" He only saw a vague figure in the darkness and suddenly felt a pain in his neck. His whole body weakly fell to the ground. Chapter 9:14. Chin Manor. All the Chin family's servants temporarily stopped what they were doing. They were absent-minded and would occasionally look in a certain direction in the manor. In a very spacious hall, Chin Xiang looked at the young woman in the hall and said in a deep voice, "Where is he?" A servant of the Chin Manor walked in from outside and said respectfully, replying to the Prime Minister, "The young Duke is not in the room." Lu Dayo bowed to Prime Minister Chin and turned to look at Chin Yen. He cupped his hands and said, "Sir Chin, this young Duke Chin forcefully kidnapped a civilian girl." Chin Yan's face was gloomy and he said coldly, "Sir Lu, you should be careful with your words. Although our court does not use words to convict people, before the matter is clear, it is best not to speak carelessly." After Chin Yan finished speaking, he looked at the woman and asked with a gloomy expression, "You said that you were kidnapped and sent here?" The man who looked like a bailiff frowned and took half a step forward, but he was stopped by Lu Dayo. The woman nodded and said, "Yes." Chin Yan asked again, "Then how did you escape the room?" The woman opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, a silhouette stepped out from behind her. The woman with a scar on her face stared straight at Chin Yan as she spoke. "I heard this young lady calling for help in her room, so I secretly let her out." Chin Yan frowned. You what you?" The man finally couldn't take it anymore. He took a step forward and said, "The witness and material evidence are conclusive. Do you still want to deny it?" "You are." Just as Chin Yan's anger rose, he was interrupted by Lu Dayo. County Magistrate Lu smiled and said, "The country has its laws. The young duke forcefully kidnapped a civilian girl. This is an established fact. Her Highness the Princess has ordered this case to be investigated strictly. I hope that Sir Chin will not hide the information about the young duke." Chin Yan impatiently shook his head. "I don't know where he is. This official is just reminding you." County Magistrate Lu smiled and respectfully bowed to Prime Minister Chin before saying, "Let's go. Wait a moment." Chin Yan stretched out his hand and pointed at the woman with a scar on her face. He said, "She's a maidservant of my Chin clan. Lord Lu, are you taking her away as well?" Lu Dayo shook his head and said, "What are you talking about, Mr. Chin? This girl is the key to this case. Of course, we have to take her with us." Chin Yan glared fiercely at the woman, but in the end, he didn't make any further movements to stop her. Chin Xiang held his forehead and leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes and muttered, this bastard, Qin clenched his fists and walked to the door. He looked at a servant of the Qin clan and asked in a low voice, "Where is that unfilial son?" The man said in a low voice, "They left through the secret passage." Qin lowered his voice and said, "Tell him to stay outside during this period of time. Don't come back." Although similar cases had occurred in the past, times had changed. The new system of the imperial court had just been established, and it was time for them to enforce the law. If they were caught, the punishment would not be light. In the distance, he saw a person walk over. With a dark expression, he asked, "Where did you go this time?" The Qin clan's fifth master, who reeked of alcohol and his clothes in disarray, cut a sorry figure, walked over. He looked around and asked, "Just now I saw an official leave. Did something happen?" As he spoke, the smell of alcohol filled the air. Qin took a step back in disgust and asked, "How did you end up like this again? You've lost all the face of the Qin clan." The Qin clan's fifth master waved his hand and said, "On the way back, I met a mad dog. As a member of the Qin clan, I obviously couldn't allow it to randomly bite me. Wouldn't that be losing face for the Qin clan? So I broke its 5 legs and broke its teeth." "Nonsense!" Qin waved his hand in extreme disgust. "Someone, bring him back to the room." A sturdy figure hurriedly ran over and supported the Qin clan's fifth master with practiced ease. As they walked back, he said in a small voice, "Fifth master is really drunk. How can a dog have 5 legs?" The Qin clan's fifth master shook his head and countered, "You have 3 legs, why can't a dog have 5? It's all my fault. I've wronged you. It's not Big Sister's fault. I was careless. You're still willing to call me sister? I'm the one who doesn't deserve to be your sister." After apologizing to each other, the two women hugged each other and cried. Fong, on the other hand, was full of smiles. His smile was so wide that it almost reached his eyebrows. Li looked at the back corner. The lady who had not raised her head since she walked in pulled Xiao Huan's sleeve, signaling to her. The servant girl immediately understood. She slowly walked over and looked at the woman with a scar on her face. She pulled the woman's hand and whispered, "Sister Lu Mei, come in. The eldest miss and the second miss are inside. Son-in-law, of course I know this." Fong patted his chest and said, "Even though Lu Lao-san is not a good person, I am indebted to Xiao Mei. In the future, I will treat her as my daughter." Li shook his head and said, "You treat her as your daughter. She treats Xiao Hong as her sister. You treat Xiao Hong as you are the one who is not a good person." Fong ran away with a red face. Lu Dao walked over and shook his head, saying, "Masterly." Qin Yu ran away. "I'm afraid it won't be easy to catch him. Kidnapping a commoner girl is not a small matter, but it's not a big matter either. Moreover, it didn't lead to a tragedy. I'm afraid the Qin family won't be touched." "Who said I was going to touch the Qin family?" He shook his head and looked at Fong, who was being lovingly beaten by Fong's wife. He said, "It's good that he's fine. As for the other things, we can take it slow." "What do you mean by it's not a big matter, but it's not a small matter?" The sloppy old man frowned, looked at Lu Dao, and asked, "Do you know what that place looks like?" What that bastard committed was more than just kidnapping a commoner girl. If he hadn't run fast, this old man would have let him see all kinds of strange martial arts in this world, so that his life wouldn't have been in vain. The sloppy old man was very excited and angry. Li could understand. This time, he was really made a fool of. If he couldn't get back at them, he was afraid that it would be difficult to untie the knot in his heart. Maybe even his heart of martial arts would be affected. Li looked at him and said, "Sue, don't be excited. Don't worry, I promise to find out this matter soon. When the time comes, I will let you do it yourself. Those who should be punished will not be spared." A worried look appeared on County Magistrate Lu's face. He said, "With such a thing happening to the Qin family, I'm afraid that very few people will impeach Lu Yi. It's best to let him investigate this matter. However, last time, we alerted the enemy. I'm afraid it won't be easy to investigate again." Li shook his head and said, "In the morning assembly tomorrow, Lord Lu will impeach Lu Yi in front of all the officials. He used his identity as a spy to break into an official's house and was lawless. Ah! County Magistrate Liu was stunned and couldn't believe his ears. Forget it. Your identity is not suitable. Li thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, let's change it to Lord Zeng. When Lord Liu goes back, please go to the capital governor's mansion. County Magistrate Liu thought for a moment and asked doubtfully, Lord Li, forgive this lowly official for being slow-witted. But why do we impeach Liu? Lord Liu is very careful. After Lord Zeng impeaches Liu, Li looked at Liu Dayo and said, Lord Liu, please write down the names of those who follow the trend. Chapter 9:15. Liu Dayo gazed at Li in a daze for a long time. Only then did he raise his hands in a somewhat ashamed gesture and say, Sir is wise. The actions of the county government were completely unconcealed. The matter of the Duke of Qin forcefully abducting a woman and fleeing to escape punishment quickly spread throughout Jingdou. This was not the first time the Duke had done such a despicable thing. He had done many more shameless things before, but by relying on his powerful background, he was able to settle them all. However, that was then, and this was now. Recently, it was a special time. Let alone the Duke. Even if it was a prince committing a crime, it had to be tried according to the rules. Otherwise, the court, which had just reformed the law, would be slapping itself in the face. Countless people were waiting to see them make a fool of themselves. Of course, no law could be changed overnight. Perhaps the Qin family would be condemned by public opinion, but it would not be able to harm their foundation. Although the people were helpless, they could only accept this reality. The Chui family. Qin Yin gazed at Chui Qingming with a face full of surprise and asked, He hasn't come to the Chui family? Chui Qingming shook his head and said, Earlier, he only sent someone to tell me about the secret intelligence office. He didn't come tonight. He then shook his head and said, Today is different from the past. He really should be more careful. If he's caught by the government, it will be troublesome. After this incident, I will let him stay at home peacefully for a period of time. When His Highness the King of Shu returns, everything will be settled. Qin Yin sighed and said, I'll go to the other families to see. If this unfilial son isn't in the Chui family, where can he hide? After Qin Yin left, a person walked up to Chui Qingming and said in a small voice, The matter of Qin Yu is only a small matter. Its influence is limited. I'm just afraid that once they catch Qin Yu and dig out some other things from his mouth, things will be very bad. Chui Qingming thought about it and waved his hand. Even if they really dig it out, what can they do? If they really have the guts to dig it out, there's no harm in helping them. The middle-aged man beside him paused and seemed to realize something. He then smiled and said, Second brother is right. Even if they have the guts, they don't have the strength. Late at night, Qin Yin dragged his tired body back to the Qin manor. His expression was dark as he muttered to himself. Just where did this unfilial son go? It was rare for Li to wake up early today. In fact, there would always be 1 or 2 days a month when he had to wake up early. Not only was he tortured by Li Duan, but Mississippi Liu had also pestered him to study with her until midnight last night. He was severely lacking in sleep. Before the old emperor arrived, he wanted to lean against a pillar and take a nap. However, a fly kept buzzing in his ears, and he couldn't chase it away no matter how hard he tried. Li Xian frowned and said, What's going on with Louis? Isn't he usually very cautious? Why is he so reckless this time? When I came over just now, I heard a lot of people talking about him in front of His Majesty. He struggled to open his eyes and said weakly, Fine, don't talk. The court is about to begin. Let me sleep for a while. Li Xian looked at him and asked in surprise, What's wrong with you? Why do you look so listless? Li glanced at him and said, If you had an energetic wife or sister, she wouldn't be much better than me. The surprise on Li Xian's face turned into shock. He asked in a low voice, You've already taken her down? Before Li could understand what he was saying, a eunuch announced in a sharp voice that His Majesty had arrived. When the old emperor went to court, he needed 2 eunuchs to support him. The eldest princess sat on the lower right side of the emperor. The officials greeted her one after another. My ministers, what important matter do you have to report to me today? He looked down at the people below. His voice was still calm, but it didn't have the same imposing manner as before. In the main hall, Chui Qingming met the eyes of several people and nodded slightly. One of them was about to step forward, but someone else in front of him stepped forward before him. Chui Qingming's eyes narrowed as he looked at the figure in front of the hall. The capital governor, Zheng Shichen, bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I accuse the Assistant Minister of Justice, Liu Yi. Relying on your Majesty's favor, he disregarded the law and brought people from the secret bureau to break into the official residence." Chui Qingming was startled, and some doubt appeared on his face. Zheng Shichen actually wanted to impeach Liu Yi. Could it be that he had guessed wrong? However, this wasn't the time to think about these things. He signaled with his eyes, and a few more people stepped forward. "I accuse the Assistant Minister of Justice, Liu Yi. I second that." For a moment, Lord Liu Yi, who had risen from small bailiff to the position of Assistant Minister of Justice in the past 2 years, became the target of public criticism. People kept stepping forward to impeach him, but the reasons for the impeachment weren't exactly the same. Behind the crowd, a gaze swept across the people who stepped forward one by one. It swept back and forth a few times before he took out a brush from his sleeve and began to write on the ceremonial tablet. The people stepped forward one by one in an orderly manner. At some point, a white-haired old man stepped forward. "It's Lord Zhao." Even Lord Zhao can't stand the actions of the Secret Intelligence Bureau. Although the old man's official position wasn't prominent, he was known for his knowledge and had many students. Of course, the most important thing was that he was old enough to speak freely in the court. "I accused the Women's College of misleading the students. They actually spread the fallacy that parents with single eyelids cannot have children with double eyelids. This is completely unsubstantiated." Lord Zhao's words confused all the court officials in the hall. Wasn't everyone criticizing Liu Yi just now? The atmosphere was unprecedentedly high. If they put in more effort, they might be able to pull him down from the position of Assistant Minister of Justice. Had Lord Zhao gone senile? Why did he run out at this time to join in the fun? The court officials didn't care. The ceremonial tablet in the hands of the capital magistrate Liu Daiyou fell to the ground, and he hurriedly picked it up. Li Xian's mouth was wide open, and his face was full of horror. Li Yi opened his eyes, and he was no longer sleepy. In the main hall, there was no expression on Emperor Jing's face. Below him, the eldest princess, who had always been as still as a mountain, had the beads hanging from the phoenix crown on her head shake. Lord Zhao's interruption was very untimely. It was very likely that he would change the topic and cause His Majesty to overlook Liu Yi's crimes. Some people began to suspect that Lord Zhao, who had always taken a clear stand, had gone senile or had betrayed them. But at the moment, this was not important. Soon, someone stood up and continued the previous topic. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, in the past 2 years, the Secret Bureau has relied on Your Majesty's favor and has become more and more lawless. If we don't control it, I'm afraid it will be detrimental to the court." Everyone ignored Lord Zhao and brought the topic back. Lord Zhao originally wanted to say something, but after hearing a few whispers from the people beside him, he had no choice but to give up. So many people in the court had stood up one after another. Even the emperor couldn't ignore the opinions of so many people. Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne and said, "Since there are so many people impeaching, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Liu Yi, will temporarily suspend the matters at hand. The matter of the Secret Bureau breaking into the official residence will be handed over to the Supreme Court for trial." After dealing with the Secret Bureau case, the court officials didn't have many important things to report. After the eunuch announced the dismissal of the court, Li Yi felt relieved and slowly walked outside with Li Xian. County Marquis Li, Crown Prince. A eunuch quickly walked over from behind and said, "His Majesty has summoned you. Please move to the Hall of Diligent Government." Chapter 9:16. Outside the Hall of Diligent Government, when they were about to step on the steps, Li Yi said to Li Xian worriedly, "Be careful when you go in." Li Xian nodded solemnly and said, "Don't worry, I know the importance of this matter." Regarding the matter of the women's college, although old Lord Zhao only said one sentence and the topic was quickly diverted, the officials and the old emperor didn't seem to hear it. But Li always had a bad feeling in his heart. "Greetings, your majesty. Greetings, Uncle Emperor." Inside the hall of diligent government, the old emperor sat on his seat, while Changde and the eldest princess stood on both sides. Emperor Jing looked up at him and asked, "Do you know about the Secret Intelligence Unit?" Li nodded and said, "The Secret Intelligence Unit found that many cases of missing women near the capital were related to the Qin family. Before breaking into the house, they had already confirmed this matter, but they didn't expect that there was a traitor in the Secret Intelligence Unit who leaked the news in advance and allowed them to transfer the evidence." Emperor Jing looked at Changde, and Changde nodded slightly. Emperor Jing asked again, "I heard that Qin Yu of the Qin family raped a woman and fled to avoid punishment?" Li nodded again. "It's true. Yesterday, the capital magistrate, Lord Liu, led the county government's constables and found the woman in the Qin family's residence. The witness and material evidence are conclusive, but Qin Yu is still missing. If we can find him, we might be able to find a connection between these two cases. It is not good for the Secret Intelligence Unit to intervene in this matter. I'll leave the Qin family's case to you." Emperor Jing picked up the teacup and moistened his lips, saying, "Is 1 month enough?" He cupped his hands and said, "I will do my best." The sloppy old man saw with his own eyes that the Qin family's case actually had a result, but it was difficult to show the process in front of everyone. If they still had any actions, they would definitely leave some traces, and things would be much simpler. But if after this matter, they completely stopped and couldn't collect evidence, things would become a little more troublesome. However, this case would come to an end sooner or later, so there was no need to worry too much. It was fortunate that the old emperor didn't seem to notice what the old man had said in court. Above, Emperor Jing took a sip of tea and turned to look at Emingzu. He asked, "Just now in the imperial court, great scholar Zhao accused the women's college of misleading students and spreading fallacies. Is that true?" Li Xian's expression changed, and he clenched his fists tightly. Li Yi closed his eyes and opened them again, looking at Mingzhu. Mingzhu's expression was calm. After a while, he said, "Recently, I have been focusing on national affairs and neglected the management of the women's college. Father, please punish me." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "The affairs of the imperial court were forced upon you by me. How could I care about the women's college and talk about punishment?" He then looked at Li Yi and asked, "Great scholar Zhao said that parents with single eyelids can't have children with double eyelids. Is that true?" "Your Majesty," great scholar Zhao said. Emperor Jing looked at him and suddenly turned back and said, "I am very interested in this matter. Changde, let the Secret Intelligence Office find 100 couples with single eyelids and see whether their children have single eyelids or double eyelids." Li Xian suddenly raised his head, and the shock on his face could no longer be concealed. Above, the eldest princess looked at Li Yi with a complicated expression. Li Yi swallowed the words that he was about to say. He raised his head and looked at Emperor Jing. After a long time, he sighed and said, "Your Majesty, there is no need to trouble the Secret Intelligence Office with this matter." There was a dead silence in the hall. After a long time, Mingzhu turned to look at Emperor Jing and said worriedly, "Father." Emperor Jing's expression was calm. He stretched out his hand and pressed down, saying, "Draft an edict to summon the king of Shu back to the capital." Then he waved his hand to the people below. "You can leave first." "I will leave. I will leave." "Ah, what a single eyelid. What a double eyelid." After the door of the hall was closed again, Emperor Jing stood up from his seat and laughed twice. Then he coughed violently and coughed up a mouthful of blood. The three of them walked out of the hall, all looking worried. Li Xian looked back and asked worriedly, "What should we do now?" The two of them walked silently with their heads down and did not answer. He said anxiously, "What time is it? Say something." Li looked back at Mingzhu and asked, "Are you hungry?" Mingzhu nodded yes. Li Xian was a little annoyed. "Hey, what time is it? You are still talking about this." After half an hour at the meal, he wiped his mouth and rubbed his bulging belly. then said the Chui family deserved to die, but Uncle Emperor. Li Yi tore a chicken leg and stuffed it into his mouth and said impatiently, "Eat your food." The Chui family would definitely perish, but definitely not in such a manner. He had heard the few violent coughs that came out from the hall, and he believed that Ming Zhu had also heard it. Using the Chui family's destruction to exchange for these, was it worth it or not? There was no conclusion. This was just the beginning. The royal family had made such a big scandal. If it was leaked, it would cause a lot of trouble and public opinion among the people. This was something that even the brothels could not control. They still did not know what the impact of the storm would be. Li Xian bit the chicken leg and said, "Uncle Emperor handed that case to you. How are you going to investigate it?" Things had already developed to this point, and it was already out of their control. It was useless to think too much. Li looked at Li Xian, who had already eaten the chicken leg, and asked, "Are you full?" Li Xian rubbed his belly. "I am full. If you're full, then go home and sleep. Don't think about that nonsense." Compared to the gloomy atmosphere of the meal party, the atmosphere of the Chui family was much more cheerful. This time, Liu Yixue will definitely not be kind in the matter of the secret intelligence agency. With so many eyes in the court watching, even if His Majesty wants to play favorites, I'm afraid it will be difficult. If the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice falls back into our hands, it will be much more convenient in the future. No matter who gets the position in the end, it is always good for us to get rid of one person. In my opinion, that capital magistrate is also a person who does not know what is good for him. The gloomy expression on the faces of the Chui family members was swept away. After all, this was the only thing that could slightly turn the situation around in recent days. If it was not for Liu Yixue, the Chu family would not have fallen, and the Chui family would also have a power that was far more powerful than they were now. The scene of Liu Yixue being condemned by thousands of people in the court today still made them feel very happy when they thought about it. At this moment, a man suddenly jogged in from outside. His face was wild with joy. As he ran, he shouted, "Lord Chui, great news, great news." Seeing that the man was almost wild with joy, Chui Qingming was puzzled and asked, "What happened? Why did Lord Su come personally?" The middle-aged man immediately said, "His Majesty has just drafted an edict to summon the king of Shu back to the capital." "What?" Chui Qingming's body trembled. He grabbed the man's arm and said excitedly, "Is this true?" "Absolutely." The man said with certainty, "The edict has already been sent to the 3 provinces. I saw it with my own eyes. Lord Chui, you just need to wait for a few more hours. I'm afraid you will hear the official announcement of the edict." "Good." Chui Qingming's eyes shone brightly. He laughed and said, "Good, it is indeed great news. Today, the Chui residents will hold a banquet to celebrate this matter." Chapter 9:17. In a courtyard of the Zeng residence, Xiao Chui rested her chin on her hands and looked in the direction of the stone table in the courtyard. She murmured, "Xiao Zhu, do you think Li won't get tired of eating osmanthus cake like that?" Xiao Zhu rolled her eyes at her and said, "Do you think Li is like you? Fickle and fickle. He used to like it more than anyone else. Now that he has Su Fuji's candied plums, he won't touch osmanthus cake anymore." Xiao Chui turned around and glared at her. "That's still better than you always stealing my candied plums." Xiao Zhu didn't continue to pay attention to her. She rested her chin on one hand and whispered, "It's good that he doesn't get tired of it. Just like how he likes your young mistress. He hasn't gotten tired of it even after so long." After that, she sighed and said, "Li met my young mistress first. At that time, he and Sister Zumo weren't that close, but now..." Xiao Chui glanced at her and said mysteriously, "You don't understand this." Xiao Zhu rolled her eyes at her again. "I don't understand. Do you?" "I don't understand?" Xiao Chui looked at her with some disdain and said, "Let me tell you, if it weren't for me, my young mistress and Lily wouldn't be so fast." Li Yi sat at the stone table. There was a plate of osmanthus cake on the table. He looked in a certain direction, his eyes unfocused. He reached out to pick up a piece out of habit and put it into his mouth. It was hard to say whether the important officials that he was keeping an eye on would make a move next. The key person in the case had actually disappeared. Chinyu, that little bastard, had no other skills, but he ran pretty fast. Even the Secret Intelligence Bureau couldn't find him. They really underestimated him in the past. Going through Chinyu to solve this case was the simplest and most convenient method. Although it was not direct enough, sometimes being direct often meant trouble. In fact, the most direct method was to give the list to the sloppy old man. Sue's anger had not yet subsided. The wrath of a grandmaster was definitely not something that those who were used to living like princes could withstand. With a complete set of techniques to separate tendons and dislocate bones, not to mention a case, they could even confess all the bad things their ancestors had done for 18 generations. These officials were probably the last trump card of the Chui family. If the case was handled this way, the Chui family would be isolated and helpless in the capital. Moreover, if the Chui family was really related to the case, the Chu family would be their example. The advantage of doing this was that the Chui family had committed such a serious crime. Although they would not be exterminated, they would not be able to escape the confiscation of their properties. Thus, there was no need to use the matter of the king of Shu to deal a fatal blow to the Chui family. The matter of the king of Shu could be handled by the royal family as an internal matter. The problem was, although this method was straightforward, it involved so many nobles and officials at the same time. It would probably cause a huge earthquake in Jingdao. The safety of the nobles could not be guaranteed. It would certainly cause panic among the people and shake the court. Why couldn't there be a method that could satisfy both sides? What a headache! What a headache! Wan Ruoqing walked out of the room and saw that there were only a few pieces of osmanthus cake left on the stone table. She walked into the kitchen and took out another plate to replace the empty one on the table. He was thinking about something. When he put the thing he touched into his mouth out of habit, he found that something was wrong. Osmanthus cake, it didn't taste like this. He came back to his senses and looked down. He found that he was holding a white and slender hand. What he put into his mouth was not osmanthus cake, but a finger as white as jade. Wan Ruoqing stared at him in a daze. Her mind was blank, so much so that she forgot to pull her finger back. Li put down her hand and looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't notice just now." "No, it's okay. I should have told you," Wan Ruoqing said with a red face and left in a hurry. On the other side, after listening to Xiao Chui's words, Xiao Zhu looked enlightened and murmured, "So that's how it is," Xiao Chui said proudly. "Of course, our young miss is a blockhead. If she had to rely on herself for this kind of thing, I don't know how long she would have to wait." "Our young miss is also a blockhead." Xiao Zhu looked thoughtful. After thinking for a while, she asked, "Didn't you say last time that Li can't hold his liquor well?" Speaking of this matter, Xiao Chui smiled and said, "How is it not good? He simply can't hold his liquor. Not to mention our young miss. Li can't even hold his liquor as well as I can. Last time, you didn't see him. He only drank 1 cup, and he was dizzy. After 3 cups, he was unconscious. After the embarrassing incident just now, he was not so absorbed in thinking about things. He finally noticed a gaze that looked over from time to time. When Xiao Zhu walked past him for the umpteenth time, he finally couldn't help but ask, "Why do you keep looking at me? After eating so many osmanthus cakes, are you thirsty? Drink some grape wine." Xiao Zhu said with a smile and handed over a wine pot. In fact, he was really coughing. He took the wine pot and poured a cup. After sniffing it, he said in surprise, "This is not grape wine, is it?" Xiao Zhu picked up the wine pot and sniffed it. "It seems that I took the wrong one. It's all wine. It's about the same. Just make do." He shook his head. "I still have important things to do today. I can't drink." He got up and walked into the house. Third Miss Chun was teaching Zhu Amo to embroider a wedding dress. A wedding dress was already more than half done and was about to be completed. After sending Third Miss Chun out, he didn't see Chun Chong. He asked casually, "Why didn't I see Lord Chun today?" "He went to the Chui family's banquet." Third Miss Chun looked at him and asked, "I heard that His Majesty summoned the king of Shu back to the capital?" Li nodded and asked again, Lord Chun went to the banquet to celebrate the return of the king of Shu. From the invitation sent by the Chui family, it should be so. Seeing his strange expression, third Miss Chen asked again, "Is there a problem?" Li Yi dismissed her servants and helped her into the carriage. When he put down the curtain, he said in a low voice, "When the king of Shu returns to the capital this time, many people will die. Probably, it will be among those who attended the banquet today." Seeing that there was no movement in the carriage for a long time, a servant girl walked up and asked in a low voice, "Third Miss, are we going back?" The curtain was lifted a little, and a voice came out, "Go to the Chui residence and tell second master that I have a headache." "Yes." The young maid responded and hurriedly ran forward. Capital Governor's residence. A servant handed over an invitation and asked, "Master, are you really not going to the invitation sent by the Chui family?" Tsang Shichen threw the invitation aside without looking at it and said, "I'm not going. If they ask, just say that I have a headache." Chui residence. Chui Qingming, who was already in charge of all the affairs of the Chui family, stood at the door and personally welcomed the guests. "Lord Qin, please come in, please come in. Lord Han, please go in first. We'll talk later. Elder Zhao, you're here too." The guests were also full of smiles. After presenting their gifts, they cupped their hands in greeting. "I've also heard that the king of Shu is about to return to the capital. Congratulations, Lord Chui." His Majesty summoned His Highness back to the capital at this time. The meaning is self-evident. I'll congratulate Lord Chui in advance. Although the news of the king of Shu's return to the capital had not been widely spread, the officials in the capital naturally had channels to know. No matter how they were suppressed in the capital, as long as His Highness was still alive, their hope was still there. Now, their hope had returned. In front of the Chui residence, a carriage stopped. Chui Qiming walked up and greeted with a smile. "Brother Chun." A servant girl ran over, panting, and whispered a few words in Chen Chong's ear. Chen Chong's expression changed, and he asked, "What did you say? Third Mrs. Sick?" Chui Qingming was startled. He took another step forward and said, "Brother Chun, please." Chen Chong turned around and jumped back in a carriage, urging, "Hurry back to the residence." Chui Qingming stood where he was, watching the carriage leave in a daze. "Please come in." The two words had just left his mouth when they dissipated in the wind. Chapter 918. The Chui family, which had been quiet for a long time, finally became lively again on the first day of the 6th month. Compared to the glory of the Chui family 2 years ago, the lively scene today was somewhat lacking. However, the desolation was only temporary. The announcement of the edict allowed everyone to see the dawn of hope. In the main hall of the Chui family, everyone toasted each other. The host and guests were happy and full of smiles. As they chatted, someone looked around, put down his wine cup, and said in surprise, "Why don't I see Lord Chun and Lord Sung?" Chui Qingming smiled and said, "Lord Sung is not feeling well, and Lord Chun has some urgent matters to attend to, so they can't come today." What urgent matter can be more important than this? Recently, Lord Chun seems to be a bit abnormal. It's not just Lord Chun. I feel that Lord Sung is even more abnormal. Today, the two of them. Chui Qiming raised his hand and pressed it down. He smiled and said, "The two lords are my colleagues, so they must have some difficult matters. Let's ignore them for now. Everyone, please drink to your heart's content today." Although Chui Qingming said this, the smile on his face was somewhat forced. There was a trace of darkness hidden in his eyes that no one noticed. "Lord Qin, is there any news from Nephew Qin?" Chui Qingming did not want to talk about this matter anymore, so someone changed the topic at the right time. A trace of anger appeared on Qin Yan's face. He said, "This unfilial son, I don't know where he went. He didn't even bring a message to the family. AI, Lord Qin, everyone here is on the same side. You don't need to hide. Yes, this is not a serious case. There is no need for nephew to hide. This will make things more complicated." Qin Yan's face revealed a complicated expression. "I won't hide it from everyone. This official really doesn't know where that unfilial son went. Everyone is well aware of this matter. Lord Qin is wrong. Qin Yan shook his head and no longer argued. He turned to look at Chui Qingming and said, His Majesty gave that case to Li Yi. I worry. Chui Qingming raised his wine cup and smiled unconcernedly. He said, So what if it was given to him? Not to mention that we have already taken care of this case. Even if he finds it, what can he do? A month's time was not short, but it was not long either. However, it was not enough to investigate a case that could not be found through proper channels. Li did not think that he was better than Master Bao. In fact, in terms of normal investigation, he was not as good as Liu Yishui. On the surface, Liu Yishui was being investigated by the Supreme Court, but he was secretly collecting evidence. Li had nothing to do. In the past half a month, all he did was teach Mississippi Liu to read, play with Tsundra Lolita and Yong Ning, accompany Rui, and sleep with the little fellow, and often visit Ruoqing's place. That was all. During this period of time, the case was still pending, and Su had a lot of opinions about him. He had an eccentric temperament and rarely cared about anything. But if he cared about something, it would not be easy for him to let it go. 10 days, 10 more days. Before he left, Li Yi promised him again and again that if there was no result within 10 days, he would use his own method to solve this matter. In the morning dew hall, the eldest princess, who had just left the court, had not yet had time to change out of her court clothes. She looked at Li Yi and, after a moment, said slowly, Don't investigate the case that father asked you to investigate anymore. Li Yi did not speak, but just looked at her quietly, waiting for her explanation. Liu Yishui has been secretly investigating this case for more than half a month. And Mingzhu poured a cup of tea for him, sat down, and said, The Chui family, the Qin family, and nearly 1/3 of the dignitaries in the capital are involved. The Chui family has done so many things, and the reason why they are still fearless is that once something happens to the Chui family, these people will all be involved. There are too many people involved in this case. This is an extremely powerful force. Once they fight back, it will cause great turmoil, affecting the entire capital and even the country. Li took a sip of tea and said, Then don't give them a chance to fight back. And Mingzhu shook her head and said, That's impossible. As long as you take action against one family, the others will immediately unite. You alone, even with me, can't resist them. She looked out of the window and said tiredly, The capital has been rotten from the root. It doesn't matter if the root is rotten, as long as the rotten root is dug out. You can't give up. Li Yi smiled, said nothing more, turned around and left. And Mingzhu quickly walked out of the door and said, We will think of a way to deal with this matter. Don't act rashly. Li Yi waved his hand and said, I know. When he walked out of the palace gate and was about to get on the carriage, a voice with a smile came from behind. Isn't this the famous county marquis Li? A middle-aged man came out of the palace and asked with a smile, I heard that His Majesty gave a serious case to County Marquis Li with a deadline of 1 month. Now that the deadline is almost here, I wonder how County Marquis Li's investigation is going? Li Yi turned around, looked at the current master of the Chui family, and said with a smile, Soon, Your Excellency Chui, I'm afraid you have to prepare early. Chui Qingming sneered and said, You investigate your case. What do I need to prepare? When Li Yi got on the carriage and put down the curtain, he reminded Chui Qingming, Your Excellency Chui, when you take a bath next time, you might as well wash your neck more. It's better to wash it clean. Chui Qingming was stunned and didn't come to himself until the carriage went far away. He touched his neck and asked, What did he mean? The servant behind him shook his head. Chui Qingming watched the carriage disappear completely, and his face darkened. He said coldly, You don't know what's good for you. I want to see how long you can be so arrogant. The Qin family. Qin Yan looked at the drunk fifth master of the Qin family who walked in from outside, and his already gloomy face became even more unsightly. He said angrily, Look at you. All you do is drink. Do you know how the people outside talk about you? How they talk about our Qin family? Qin raised his head to look at him and asked, Isn't this good? The anger on Qin Yan's face grew even stronger. Don't you know what you were like in the past, and what you are like now? Qin sighed, raised his head to look at Qin Yin, and asked, "If I were to become like I was in the past, the one that should be worried should be Big Brother, right?" "You." Qin Yin was stunned as he looked at Qin He's disappearing figure, and after a short moment, his expression changed indeterminately. Although he couldn't help but want to reprimand Qin He every time he saw Qin He's useless appearance, he felt in his heart that Qin He's current appearance was much, much better than before. At least, Qin He wouldn't feel the danger of the entire Qin family being out of his control. After a short moment, he suppressed these thoughts in his heart, turned his head to look, and muttered, "It's been almost a month. Where did this unfilial son go?" It's been almost a month. In another courtyard of the Qin family, the fifth master of the Qin family washed his face, and the drunkenness on his face disappeared. Wu Er stood at the side, and with a handkerchief on the ground, he asked curiously, "Fifth Master, what's almost a month?" The deadline for County Marquis Li's investigation is almost here. The fifth master of the Qin family took the handkerchief, wiped his face, and threw it to the side. He looked at Wu Er and said, "There's almost no time. Take me to see County Marquis Li." Chapter 919. Imperial Father spends most of his time sleeping now. Imperial Mother won't even let me talk to Imperial Father. The proud Lolita propped up her chin with one hand and sat opposite Li. Bored, she picked up the chess pieces on the chessboard and muttered, "I wanted to play chess with Imperial Father today. If I deliberately lost a few games to him, perhaps Imperial Father would be happy." Li rubbed her head and said, "You know how to let go. Our Shawning has also grown up now." In the past, when Li rubbed her head like this, she would always squint her eyes, smile, and reveal the dimples at the corners of her mouth like a lazy cat. She didn't know when it started, but she started to resist this action. "In that game just now, I also let Sir win a few times. Otherwise, I would have won a long time ago." She puffed out her chest and said with some pride, "Moreover, I didn't just grow up. I've grown up a long time ago. I'll be 15 soon." A 15-year-old proud Lolita could no longer be called a little girl. When Li looked carefully, he found that the trace of baby fat on her face was now completely gone. She looked at Li with joy, shook his arm, and said, "Sir, now that I've grown up, can I drink the same soup as Imperial Sister?" Li was startled. He lowered his head to look at her and asked, "Why do you want to drink that kind of soup?" "Nothing much. If Imperial Sister can drink it, then I can drink it too." She lowered her head and looked at her toes. She said with a red face, "Moreover, I've already asked the nannies in the palace. Making soup for Xiao Huan and Rui was out of consideration for family. Giving soup to the eldest princess was out of concern for a friend. To let a proud Lolita drink soup, then he was a beast with evil intentions." Before he could think of a reason to fool her, the servants of the Leaf family came to report that a guest had come to visit. This was truly an unexpected guest. Qin He stepped into the hall and bowed. "Greetings, Lord Li." Wu Er lowered his head and walked over from behind. He silently stood behind Li. Li stretched out his hand and said, "Sit." After Qin He sat down, he looked at the girl who had an extraordinary temperament and was playing with the chessboard in boredom. Li introduced, "This is Princess Shawning." Qin He, who had already sat down, suddenly stood up and said respectfully, "This commoner greets your highness. Don't stand on ceremony, don't stand on ceremony." The proud Lolita waved her hand. She didn't like these people who had to bow endlessly when they saw her. She was still waiting for this person to leave so that she could talk to the mister about drinking the soup. Li picked up his teacup and gestured to Qin He, asking, "May I know why Fifth Master Qin is here today?" "Qin He is not worthy of Lord Li's title of Fifth Master." After Qin Wu sat down, he shook his head and said, "Lord Li, you've been investigating the Qin family's case these days. I wonder if you found anything?" Li put down his teacup, looked at him in surprise, and asked, "Fifth Master, do you think it's appropriate for you to ask this question?" Lord Li is wise. If the Qin family has really done something dirty, I don't think they can hide it from you. Qin He shook his head and said, "It's just that sometimes, in addition to the result, the process is equally important." Fifth Master Qin took out a thick book from his sleeve, put on the table, and said, "The Qin family is attached to the Chui family and the king of Shu. All these years, they have done a lot of things behind my father's back, all of which are in this book." After he sat back down, he said, "The missing women's case that Lord Li is investigating involves not only the Qin family. This case has always been secretly planned by my good-for-nothing nephew. Unfortunately, although he is good for nothing, he is a rare tough nut to crack. Please forgive me for being powerless." Li Yi's gaze lingered on him for a long time before he asked, "Is Qin Yu still alive?" Qin Yi nodded. "Yes." Li Yi took a sip of tea, then gave him a thumbs up and praised, "Fifth Master Qin, you really have a good way." Qin, he just modestly cupped his hands. "In terms of means, I am far inferior to you, Lord Li." The two of them complimented each other face to face, which seemed a little shameless. Li looked at him and asked, "You came today to deliver this?" Qin shook his head and said, "I also wanted to remind you, Lord Li, that this case involved a lot of people. Once it is investigated in depth, I'm afraid it will affect half of the capital. It's best to be careful." Li looked distressed. "Then what should I do? I definitely can't fight half of the capital. How about we stop investigating and go to His Majesty to receive punishment?" Qin lowered his head, then quickly raised it again. Looking at the chessboard beside him, he said, "Press the strong and not the weak. Take away a few of their most important chess pieces, and they will also lose the game." Li Yi nodded, looked at him, and asked, "Fifth Master, do you also play chess?" This turn could not be said to be small. Qin came back to his senses and nodded. "I know a little." Among the people she found who could play against her, the arrogant Lolita had no opponents. Li Yi handed the black chess pieces to Qin, then looked at the arrogant Lolita and said, "If you beat him, you can drink as much soup as you want." The arrogant Lolita's eyes lit up, and she asked excitedly, "Really?" Li Yi nodded. "When has Master ever lied to you?" "Pinky swear." After confirming with Li Yi, the arrogant Lolita looked at Qin and urged, "What are you still standing there for? Come over and play chess." Qin lowered his head and said, "What kind of status do I have? How could I dare to play chess with the princess?" The arrogant Lolita put her hands on her hips like a little hen and pretended to be fierce. "I tell you to play, so play. This is an order." Qin glanced at Li Yi and had no choice but to sit over. After a dozen moves, the arrogant Lolita wrinkled her pretty nose and said with dissatisfaction, "Even if I want to win fair and square. I don't need you to go easy on me. If you go easy on me again, I will ask Father Emperor to beat you." Qin's face was expressionless, but a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes. He nodded and said, "This commoner obeys." Although Li Yi had also investigated this fifth master of the Qin family, he only knew that he was good at chess from a seemingly unintentional sentence from Prince Ning. The arrogant Lolita did not lack talent. What she lacked was the accumulation of time and experience. In terms of chess skills, she was still a distance away from these old foxes. Not long after, her delicate eyebrows furrowed tightly. Qin put down a chess piece and stood up. He cupped his hands and said, "Your Highness, thank you for going easy on me." The arrogant Lolita's little face showed a look of distress. If she lost, she would not be able to drink the soup that Master personally brewed. She glared at the person opposite her. This man was really hateful. She was still a child. Did he not know to go easy on her? What are you so proud of? She curled her lips and removed the black chess pieces at several key positions on the chessboard. She put down her white chess pieces and said proudly, "Now I've won." Qin opened his mouth. The arrogant Lolita immediately said, "Don't speak. If you speak again, I'll have Imperial Father beat you." Li looked at Qin and said with a smile, "Sorry, this is how our family plays chess." The arrogant Lolita was overjoyed because Master had just said, "Our family." Qin looked at the chessboard, then looked at Li Yi. He seemed to have understood something. A smile also appeared on his face. He took back the booklet on the table and bowed, saying, "I've lost. Your Highness, Lord Li, I will take my leave." "Master, I've won." The arrogant Lolita turned to look at him and made a gesture of victory. In the kitchen, Li Yi helped the arrogant Lolita boil soup. He conveniently took a chicken leg and handed it to the sloppy old man standing outside the door with a bitter expression. The sloppy old man glanced at him. I have no appetite. Forget it, forget it. That thing. I'll give it to you. Li Yi took out a booklet and handed it to him. He said, if you don't have enough people, you can go to the Lu Alliance to find Lu Luo. They shouldn't refuse Su's request. After the sloppy old man took the booklet, he flipped through it and turned to leave. After a few steps, he turned back and snatched the chicken leg from Li Yi's hand. The next moment, his figure suddenly disappeared. Chapter 920. This world was different from the future. After being here for a few years, Li Yi gradually understood some principles. For some people, if you try to reason with them, they would act like a hooligan. If you try to reason with them, they would act like a hooligan. If you try to reason with them, they would act like a hooligan. If you try to reason with them, they would be even more of a hooligan than you. To deal with this kind of hooligan, there was no need to talk about reason or the law. Directly flipping the table was the best choice. It was like playing chess with Itsundra Loli. It didn't matter who won or who had the advantage. As long as she used her ultimate killing move, the universe's invincible howling celestial dog, or the contestants turned into the referee and declared that they would win, the game would be over. Similarly, influenced by the Itsundra Loli, he didn't want to continue playing with the Chui family. It was better to directly flip the table. With an old hooligan like Su around, who would be more of a hooligan? Sir, is the soup ready? The Itsundra Loli sat in the courtyard, anxiously waiting. Li Yi collected his thoughts and opened the lid of the clay pot. He picked up a spoon and tasted it. He turned around and said, it's ready, Lu Meng. Dozens of people respectfully stood in an open space. They looked at a sloppy old man in front of them. Their faces were filled with excitement. They bowed and said, we will follow Senior's orders. The sloppy old man turned his head and signaled. Someone had already handed them a piece of paper. His face darkened, and he said coldly, look carefully. Tonight, you will see these names. Don't leave out a single one. Understood. Everyone bowed, and their voices resounded throughout the drill ground. Qin Manor. The servants of the Qin clan watched as a drunk figure walked into the mansion. They glanced at him and then looked away. They were already used to Fifth Lord's behavior. But the strange thing was that he usually had a man supporting him. Today, he came back alone. Qin Yin walked out of the hall. He found it hard to calm the melancholy in his heart. Qin Yu had already disappeared for almost a month. In this month, not a single piece of news had been sent back. Within the capital, he had asked everyone he could think of, but there was still no news at all. At this point, he finally had a bad premonition in his heart. This wasn't like the unfilial son's personality, and it didn't make sense. It was as if he had completely disappeared from this world. Not only could the Qin family not find him, but even the government and the secret intelligence agency couldn't find him. Although he didn't know his son that well, he knew very well that he didn't have the ability to hide so well that even the Secret Service couldn't find him. He was already depressed, and when he saw the drunken figure walking over, he was naturally even more annoyed. You want to drink again? Look at you now. You don't look like a human at all. The fifth lord of the Qin family raised his head, looked at him solemnly, and said, Brother, I actually don't like it when you say that about me. Qin Yan's eyes widened. This was the first time in recent years that he had seen his fifth brother talk back to him. He pointed at him and said in disbelief, Look in the mirror. Look at yourself. I'm doing this for the sake of the Qin family's face. You still dare to talk back. Face? Fifth Lord Qin laughed mockingly and said, Don't deceive yourself and others. What face does the Qin family have left? The Qin family's face was not lost by me, but by you people. Qin Yan's face revealed anger, pointed at him, and said, How much did you drink tonight? Bastard, bastard. You dare to say such words. Do you still have any manners? Qin looked at him seriously, shook his head, and said, Rules. Don't be naive. Rules are meant to be broken. If worst comes to worst, I'll just flip the table and not play anymore, he muttered, and then said, Also, I don't like it when you call me bastard. Bang! Qin Yan's body flew back into the room, knocking over several tables and chairs. Qin rubbed his forehead and muttered, I'm really a bit drunk. I can't even control my hands and feet. Wu Er, why aren't you helping Fifth Lord? Wu Er. After saying these two sentences, he nodded in understanding. Oh, Wu Er is gone. He's coming. A sturdy figure ran over from behind and supported his swaying body. He looked at the Qin family's servants at the side and said angrily, Are all of you dead people? What are you still standing there for? Why aren't you going to help the great lord? The capital was the richest place in the Jing kingdom, and it was also the place where the nobles and officials gathered the most. In the same city, there were poor commoners who didn't know the next meal and were worried about their livelihood. There were also high officials who were fish in the day and had fun at night. The two regions, one in the north and one in the south, were like two completely different worlds. In the southern district of the capital, in a luxurious mansion, the naked middle-aged fatty had just climbed down from the body of the seventh concubine he married a few days ago. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and inadvertently glanced at him. The sweat that he had just wiped off came out again, but this time it was cold sweat. His body trembled a few times, and he looked at the cloaked figure sitting at the table in the middle of the hall and said with a trembling voice, You? Who are you? Is it over? A surprised voice came from under the cloak. That's a bit fast. Your kidneys aren't working, right? As the voice fell, two figures slowly walked over. One of the figures glanced at the naked woman on the bed a few times. The other person beside him coughed lightly. Watch your discipline. That person immediately retracted his gaze, and with a flick of his toes, the quilt that had fallen to the ground flew up to the bed and covered the woman's body. The woman had long been scared pale, but the middle-aged fatty pretended to be calm. He pointed at the two people and asked, You? Who are you? What do you want? Do you know who I am? One of them waved his hand and said, Han Dian, you've committed a crime. Come with us. Han Dian? The middle-aged fatty was stunned and said, I'm not Han Dian what? That person was stunned, and he asked, Isn't this the Han residence? The middle-aged fatty said timidly, This is the Han residence, but the Han Dian you're talking about lives in the Han residence next door. Between the two of them, one of them took out a portrait, and after looking at it carefully, he cursed in a low voice, Damn it, we've gone the wrong way. He glared at the person beside him, and then looked at the middle-aged fatty and said, I'm sorry, I've mistaken you for someone else. Sorry for disturbing you. You can continue. The two of them walked out of the door, and when they closed the door, one of them turned back and whispered, Eat more chives on a daily basis, it's good. Claw thorn. Before the middle-aged fatty could finish his sentence, he felt a sharp pain in his neck, and his entire body went limp and fell onto the bed. The woman wanted to open her mouth to scream, but her vision also went black, and she lost consciousness. Not long after, in the house next door, a middle-aged man curled up at the foot of the bed and looked at the two people in the room in horror. He said with a trembling voice, You? Who are you? What are you doing here? A black shadow in the room asked in a deep voice, Are you Han Sanyuan? The middle-aged man felt relieved, and he shook his head and said, No, you've got the wrong person. I'm Han Dian. That's right. A person walked forward and tapped his neck lightly. The middle-aged man was horrified to find that his body could no longer move. The figure hidden in the cloak said coldly, Han Dian, you've committed a crime. Come with us. Chapter 921. The weather is dry. Be careful of the fire. Guard against thieves and burglars. Close the doors and windows. It's the third watch. It was a dark and windy night. It was a day of murder and arson. The clouds were thick and the stars were hidden, covering the moon. The entire capital was shrouded in a thick layer of darkness. The next day would certainly not be a sunny day, but for some people, tonight was a rare opportunity. In the third watch, in the capital, regardless of whether it was the commoners or the nobles, they had all put out their lights and gone to sleep. The night watchman struck the gong and slowly walked through the streets. From time to time, a group of patrolling soldiers would hurriedly pass by. Their armor and weapons clashed, creating clanging sounds. However, neither the night watchman nor the soldiers noticed that above their heads, countless ghostly figures were swiftly passing by. In a noble manner, in a quiet manner, a few barks suddenly came from a dog. A guard opened his sleepy eyes and mumbled, "It's the middle of the night. What are you barking for? Tomorrow, we'll kill you and make stew." Although he said this, he still got up and opened the door, intending to go over and take a look. In the courtyard, in the darkness of the night, a black figure looked indifferently at the vicious dog opposite him. The vicious dog immediately stopped barking and ran back to its kennel with its tail between its legs. The guard, whose hand was already on the door latch, narrowed his eyes and listened. He then shook his head and sleepily returned to his room. In a room in the courtyard, another figure completely shrouded in a cloak patted the face of a man who was sleeping soundly on the bed. "Wake up!" The man opened his eyes. His face was filled with panic and fear. Then, his acupuncture points were sealed. He could not move or speak. His entire body was put into a large bag. The figure carried the bag and walked into the courtyard. With a light leap, he leaped onto the courtyard wall. The figure in the courtyard glanced at the kennel and quickly retreated. In the darkness of the night, there was more than one figure carrying a large bag hurriedly. Everyone rushed over from all directions. Finally, they all gathered in the same courtyard. The unkempt old man swept his gaze over them and said, "Count, count. Is everyone here?" A person counted and respectfully said, "There should be 40 people, but there are 38. There are 2 more people on the way. Senior, please give us your instructions." "They're here." As soon as the voice fell, 2 large bags were thrown in from outside. The sloppy old man walked back in the hall, pulled out a chicken leg, took a bite, and said, "You should be responsible for your own people." There were quite a few rooms in the courtyard. Everyone split into groups of 2, picked up the squirming bags in the courtyard, and picked a room to enter. In a certain room, the man sitting in front of the table looked at the figure kneeling before him and asked in a deep voice, "Name? You, who are you people?" In the hall, the man who was only wearing an inner shirt had a look of horror on his face. "Why did you bring me here?" The man asked again, "Name? You, do you know who I am? If you capture me, don't even think about escaping the capital." Behind him, a man kicked him impatiently. "I'm asking you a question. Come back here and don't play any tricks." Although the man kneeling there was terrified, the situation was beyond his control. In order not to provoke these villains, he could only answer honestly, "Witty, official position, Ministry of Works, Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works." The man glanced at him and said, "What bad things have you done? Tell me." The man called Witty looked up, then lowered his head and said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Leniency for those who confess, and severity for those who resist." The man in the cloak reminded him, "For example, the dirty things you've done with the Chin family and the Chui family. Tell me everything." Wei Chi's body trembled. He raised his head and said helplessly, "Why did you capture me? I really don't know what you're talking about." The man in the cloak turned his gaze to another person and said, "Don't waste time. Do it. You want to—" The man named Wei Chi had not even finished his sentence when he fell to the ground. Blue veins were bulging on his exposed skin. His forehead was dripping with cold sweat. His body was twitching uncontrollably. It was obvious that he was in extreme pain. The man squatted down and asked, "Are you going to tell me?" I don't know. I don't know what to say." The man didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he reached out and touched a certain spot on Wei Chi's body again. This time, the blue veins under his skin began to throb like wriggling earthworms. It was extremely terrifying. At the same time, from time to time, he let out a low roar of extreme pain. Tears and mucus flowed down his face. Without waiting for the man to ask any questions, he immediately said, "I'll tell you. I'll tell you. I'll tell you everything." The man reached out and touched Wei Chi's body twice. Wei Chi's clothes were already soaked. He lay on the ground, gasping for breath, as if he had just been fished out of the water. The man shook his head and threw a pen and paper in front of him. "Why didn't you cooperate earlier? Be honest and don't try to fool us. We all know your background." If you dare to write a lie, I'll let you have a taste of what you just experienced. Witty quickly turned over, grabbed the pen, and quickly wrote on the paper. If he confessed, he might lose his official hat and die. But if he didn't, he would feel worse than death. Even if he died, he didn't want to experience that kind of torture again in another room. You don't want to talk, do you? The masked man stood up and looked at the figure kneeling in the room. After taking 2 steps, he said to another person, "Do it." The man was stunned and asked, "Do what?" The masked man said, "Let him have a taste of the separating tendons and dislocating bones hand." The man looked at him and murmured, "The separating tendons and dislocating bones hand. I don't know how to do it." The masked man was also stunned. "Then what do you know?" The man shook his head and said, "I practice proper martial arts, not this kind of method." The masked man sat down again and said, "I don't care. I was the one who caught him, so you can interrogate him. If you can't interrogate him, my points won't be deducted." "You." That person glared at him, but he also felt somewhat helpless. He lowered his head to look at the man kneeling on the ground with a face full of panic, and praised, "This person is not a good person, but he looks rather handsome." He looked up at the masked man and said, "Step aside." After saying that, he began to take off his pants. The man kneeling on the ground changed his expression and said in a trembling voice, What are you doing? Don't let me go. I'll talk. I'll tell you everything." The man shook his head with some regret and put on his pants. Looking at the masked man, he said, "The interrogation is finished. In the other rooms, we will not wrongly accuse any good person, and we will not let any bad person go. You have the right to remain silent, and I also have the right to beat you until you don't." A few months ago, the case of Lady Shuang Shuang of the Wonderful Sound Pavilion had caused an uproar in Jingdo. Everyone knew about it. Later on, her unjust case was redressed. In order to commemorate her, warn the Yamen, and comfort the people, the court reformed the law and built an ancestral hall for her in Jingdo. In order to thank Lady Shuang Shuang for her contributions, people did not hesitate to travel from distant places to pay their respects. As a result, the incense and offerings in Lady Shuang Shuang's ancestral hall never stopped. Every morning, before the ancestral hall opened, countless people would line up in front of the door, waiting for the manager to open the hall. Today was also a normal morning. A Yamen runner yawned. After opening the main door of the ancestral hall, he did not go in to take a look. He walked away in a daze. His daily duty was to open and close the door. It was still early, so it was best to go back and have a good night's sleep. Everyone lined up and walked in, holding incense and offerings in their hands. The moment they stepped into the courtyard, they saw a scene that they did not expect. According to tradition, before entering the ancestral hall, they had to first pay their respects in front of the stone tablet in the courtyard. At this moment, figures were tightly bound with ropes. They were kneeling motionlessly in front of the stone tablet. In front of each of them was a piece of paper that was pressed down by a stone. The paper was densely packed with small words. It was too far to see clearly. Everyone stopped in their tracks. Their faces were filled with shock. They did not dare to go forward. Taking advantage of the time, when someone reported to the Yamen, some busybodies counted the number of people kneeling on the ground. There were exactly 40 people. Finally, someone could not resist his curiosity and took a few tentative steps forward. Soon, a number of people followed. Chapter 922. The people were facing the stone tablet, and the people who were tied up and kneeling on the ground were also facing the stone tablet. Thus, no one could see their faces clearly. Only when one person mustered up the courage to walk forward and lowered his head to take a look did he let out a cry of surprise. This looks like Assistant Minister Wei of the Ministry of Works. That can't be. Why is Assistant Minister Wei kneeling here? Isn't that Official Han? Why is he also kneeling here? Official Fong, Official Qi, Lord Wei. Heavens, what is going on? Why are they all kneeling here? The people present naturally couldn't recognize all the faces of these people, but there were always some people who, due to their status, often appeared in front of the people, so it wasn't difficult to recognize them. It was also because of this that everyone present was shocked and in disbelief. Because all the people kneeling here were high-ranking officials and dignitaries of the capital. Who would have thought that these people, who were usually so high and mighty that they couldn't even come into contact with, were at this moment tied up with ropes and kneeling in front of the stone tablet in the ancestral hall? Their eyes could clearly move, but their bodies couldn't move, and their mouths couldn't speak. It was broad daylight. Could it be that he had seen a ghost? Finally, someone noticed the abnormality. He pointed at the papers in front of these people and said to the crowd, "Look, what's written on these papers?" Someone picked up a piece of paper and looked at it. The expression on his face was at first stunned, then gradually became one of hatred and anger. These corrupt officials, they're beasts. Under his lead, everyone walked forward and picked up the papers that were pressed down by the stones on the ground. These corrupt officials are actually so daring, right under the feet of the emperor of the capital. For these things, even if they died 10 or 100 times, it still wouldn't be enough. Could it be that the heavens have shown their will and dragged out all these beasts to kneel before Lady Shuang's memorial tablet? The heavens have eyes, the heavens have eyes. The papers in everyone's hands were densely filled with the crimes committed by these officials and nobles who were kneeling on the ground in their entire lives. Every single one of them was horrifying, and it caused one's heart to go cold just by looking at it. They had no idea that these people, who usually looked bright and noble on the outside, were actually so dirty on the inside. When they knelt neatly in front of the tombstone, and the crimes that they had signed and stamped were placed in front of everyone, the suppressed emotions in the hearts of the people suddenly exploded. One of them finally couldn't take it anymore. He kicked the person closest to him, who was kneeling on the ground, and said angrily, You all deserve to die. Yes, kill them so that they don't come out and harm people again. Kill them and get rid of the scourge for the people." After the first few people made a move, the crowd immediately became enraged. They pushed the people kneeling on the ground and started punching and kicking them. The people kneeling on the ground were not only tied up with ropes, but their acupoints were also sealed. Other than being able to move their eyes, they could not even speak a word, let alone struggle to escape. They could only endure the rage of the crowd. The commotion in the ancestral hall quickly attracted the attention of the people nearby. The crowd surrounded the ancestral hall so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. The people on the outside had no idea what was going on. They couldn't squeeze in, but people kept coming in from behind. Out of the way, out of the way. The bailiffs were always late out of habit. After a full quarter of an hour, more than 10 bailiffs ran over from afar. They pushed through the crowd and squeezed into the ancestral hall. "Stop, all of you stop." Seeing the chaos in the ancestral hall, the expressions of the bailiffs changed. Regardless of the identity of the people who were tied up and beaten black and blue on the ground, and regardless of the reason for this scene, if they continued to beat them like this, they were afraid that someone would die. The uniformed bailiffs with weapons in their hands were still a great deterrent to the ordinary people. The crowd gradually dispersed, and at the same time, they did not forget to add a few more kicks. What exactly is going on? One of the bailiffs looked at the pitiful state of the people and felt a chill in his heart. He asked loudly, "Sir, look at this." A commoner handed over a thick stack of paper. After the bailiffs flipped through a few pieces of paper, his legs couldn't help but feel weak. He only managed to stabilize himself after being supported by the people behind him. Save me." A weak cry for help came from under his feet. The constable sensed that someone was holding his ankle. He hurriedly squatted down and asked, Who are you?" I am the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works, Wei." The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, whose face was already swollen like a pig's head, fainted before he could finish his sentence. The bailiffs looked at him and carefully tried to identify him for a long time, but he still couldn't see which part of him resembled the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works. He sat on the ground with a pale face. It didn't matter if this person was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works or not. If he wasn't the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, he could be another assistant minister or some other influential official. It didn't matter who he was. What was important was that the sky had fallen. He pointed outside in a panic and said, "Quick, go to the yamen and call someone. Tell Sir Tsung that something big has happened." At the same time, in the mansion of an official in the capital, a servant stood at the door of a room. He paced back and forth for a long time and said with some confusion, "Why hasn't Sir gotten out of bed yet? Is he not going to court today?" He finally couldn't help but knock on the door, then pushed it open and entered. Seeing the empty bed, he said in surprise, "Where is Sir?" Not long after, a servant hurriedly ran out of the door and went straight in the direction of the yamen. Along the way, there were many people who were just as panicked as they were. The capital yamen. Sung Shichin had actually just woken up and finished washing up. Before he could beat the drum and start the court, a bailiff ran in from outside in a panic and said with a pale face, "Sir, something big has happened." Sung Shichin frowned and said, "What is it? Tell me slowly." The bailiffs hurriedly said, 40 officials and nobles in the capital were kidnapped last night and were only found this morning. They were all tied up and kneeling in Lady Shuang Shuang's ancestral hall. Sung Shichin was startled and asked, "How many did you say?" "Not more, not less. Exactly 40. As soon as he finished speaking, there was already a burst of noise coming from the entrance of the yamen. "I want to report a case. My lord is missing. My marquis is also missing. My old master and second master are missing." Sung Shichin's body swayed, and he had to support himself against the wall to steady himself. More than 40 officials and nobles in the capital had all been kidnapped in one night. Where did these bandits eat the heart of a bear and the leopard's gall? This was not a crime. This was clearly piercing the sky. In front of the yamen, there was a burst of ghostly wails and wolf howls. In the great hall of the imperial palace, the civil and military officials all looked puzzled. Without the slightest sign, the number of people in court today was nearly 20% less than the day before. Although the court was not empty, the crowd had indeed become much sparser. The censors were standing in a line at the front, impeaching the officials who were absent from court for no reason. A eunuch ran in quickly from outside. Because he was too flustered, he even tripped when he stepped into the hall. He stumbled and crawled in. He knelt on the ground and said in a panicked voice, "Your Highness, the capital governor has an urgent report." A moment later, the originally quiet court suddenly became an uproar. Above the great hall, the eldest princess slowly stood up. As if she had thought of something, her expression changed slightly. Wave after wave of news, with a certain ancestral hall as the center, spread within a few hours. The capital was shaken. Chapter 923. This was probably the fastest the government had ever handled a case. The people who had reported the case were still at the door of the yamen. There was no need to rush to redress their grievances, but the important figures who had been lost had all been found. Logically speaking, regardless of whether it was the government or the people who had reported the case, this was a joyous matter. The case had been solved, and everyone could go home and find their own mothers. No one would be troubled. However, the matter was not so simple. The people who had been tied up were all influential figures in the capital, and 40 of them had been tied up quietly. They had only been discovered in the morning. This was probably the worst case that had happened in the capital since the founding of the country. After today, how could the other officials and nobles in the capital sleep peacefully? After all, no one wanted to go to sleep at night and wake up the next day in a strange place. Their bodies were tied up, unable to move or speak, and they had to kneel in front of the people. This case had to be investigated, thoroughly investigated. If those vicious thugs were allowed to roam freely in the capital, no one would be able to sleep peacefully in the future. This was only one of the reasons. The papers that recorded the crimes of the officials and nobles who were tied up had long been spread by the mouth of the public. They were indeed the victims, but at the same time, they were the perpetrators. The words that were written with blood and tears could be verified to prove their authenticity. The court was in the midst of a legal reform. Although the crimes of the nobles could not be equated with those of the common people, if a common person committed any of the crimes, they would be beheaded dozens or hundreds of times. It would not be too much to just behead them once, right? Each of these people had committed grave crimes. There were countless eyes watching outside. Who would dare to let them go back? Sung Shichin rubbed the space between his eyebrows. He had already ordered the bailiffs and bailiffs to bring those people back, but other than a few who could speak, the others seemed to have been cast with a paralysis spell. Even though their noses were bruised and their faces swollen, they could not make a sound of pain, much less move. "Sir Tsang, can I bring my master back?" "Sir, my master is injured and needs immediate treatment. Your government is not going to catch those assassins, but instead detain these officials here. What are your intentions?" Sung Shichin rubbed his temples again when he heard the shouts coming from outside the hall. Those people were either nobles or high officials. Even he couldn't offend so many clans at the same time. Just as he was having a headache, a constable finally walked in with a happy expression and said loudly, "Sir, someone from the palace has come." It was not only the eunuchs who came from the palace to announce the imperial edict, but also the medical officials of the Imperial Physician Bureau. After examining them, the imperial physician Lu Jimin shook his head and said, "These people have all had their acupoints sealed. It's the technique of a warrior." A gray-robed old man walked out from the back. He stretched out his hand and pointed at one of the men's necks. In the next moment, a miserable howl was heard. The man finally regained his freedom. He covered his buttocks and screamed miserably. The gray-robed old man walked around the crowd and unsealed everyone's acupoints one by one. Suddenly, everyone heard a series of screams, and the situation went out of control. Sing Shichin stepped forward, looked at the young man at the front, and asked, "What did His Highness say?" Lu Yichun looked at him and slowly said, "Investigate thoroughly." Sung Shichin nodded and said, 40 officials have been arrested. The impact is too bad. If we don't investigate clearly, many of the officials in the court will not agree. A thorough investigation naturally has to be conducted. However, to be able to commit such a crime without anyone knowing, I'm afraid it's not the work of an ordinary person. It won't be easy to investigate this case. The crimes committed by these sinful officials and nobles must be thoroughly investigated. Lu Yichun looked at him and said, "These people will temporarily stay in the capital government office. The Imperial Physician Bureau will treat their injuries. The Secret Intelligence Bureau will take over everything else." A smile appeared on Sung Shichin's face. He placed a thick stack of papers in Lu Yichun's hand and said, "I'll have to trouble Lord Lu." The onlookers had already surrounded the capital government office. If those wicked people who had committed heinous crimes walked out, it was likely that some uncontrollable events would occur. Fortunately, this time, the court did not disappoint them. Not a single one of the 40 people walked out of the government office. The capital governor's manor had also put up a notice outside, expressing strong condemnation of those audacious thieves who had kidnapped officials and nobles. At the same time, it expressed that the case would be strictly investigated and the thieves would be arrested as soon as possible so that the capital could be restored to order. As for the crimes that these 40 people had confessed to, the government would certainly verify them one by one. Once verified, they would not be tolerated. If the people had any clues or evidence, they were welcome to provide them, and they were also welcome to supervise. If the government handled a case like this every time, the people would naturally not be dissatisfied, and the grievances like do-ease would probably not occur. The people were very satisfied with the way the government handled the case, and their emotions were no longer agitated. They no longer gathered in front of the government office and gradually dispersed. However, their attention did not shift. Overnight, the capital government office, including the 40 mansions, became the focus of the entire capital. The Chui family. No one from the Chui family had gone missing last night, but they were even more frightened than the families who had gone missing. 40 people, their last remaining force in the capital, their last trump card, had been wiped out in one night. In one night, completely wiped out. It was not just 40 people, it was 40 families. They had spent a great deal of effort to win over the power that they had. They all had something on the Chui family, and they were bound together for good or ill with the Chui family. They were not people in the same boat. The Chui family ship was in front, and their small boats were connected to it. The Chui family ship rode the wind and waves, and they could also move forward. If the Chui family ship sank, they would sink with it. The destruction of one small boat had a limited impact on the big boat, but if all 40 small boats on the big boat sank, how could the Chui family ride the waves alone? As soon as he heard the news, the current head of the Chui family, Chui Qingming, was so angry that he spat out a mouthful of blood and had yet to wake up. The people of the Chui family gathered in the meeting hall, and everyone's faces were filled with panic. In just one night, the Chui family had gone from having countless supporters to being alone. Although they could not be considered alone, there was still the Qin family, the Chun family, and the Zheng family, but at this time they could no longer affect the general situation. This was not the most frightening thing. The crimes of those people might be related to the Chui family in some way. If their crimes were proven, the Chui family and the Chui family would find it very difficult to escape. Originally, because of the King of Shu's return to the capital, they had finally seen a glimmer of light, but once again, it was covered by a huge black curtain. The Qin family. The daring thieves must be investigated, but as officials and nobles, they disregarded the law and acted so unscrupulously. They are destined to be punished by the law. His Majesty has already ordered a strict investigation of this case. Although it will cause a great shock in the capital, in the long run, the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. At the family banquet, Qin Xiang looked at the people below and said in a low voice, "You must all take this as a warning." Clang! Qin Yan's hands trembled. He could not hold the bowl in his hands, and it fell to the ground with a crisp sound. Beside him, his two brothers, who were also officials in the imperial court, were also pale. At the bottom of the banquet, the Qin family's fifth master picked up a mouthful of food and tore off a chicken leg. He threw it to the man, standing in the corner, and continued to eat with his head lowered. The news of the kidnapping of 40 officials and nobles in the capital was known to Li Yi last night. The case that the old emperor had ordered him to investigate was about to reach its deadline. Suddenly, the suspects turned themselves in one after another, and there was no need to investigate at all. His recent luck was simply too good, until the eldest princess, who was not in a good mood, walked in from outside and asked, "Have you forgotten what you promised me?" Sitting across from him, Mississippi Lu, who was reading a book, put down her book and raised her head to look over. Clearly, she also wanted to know what Li Yi had promised her. Li looked at the eldest princess, then turned to look at Mississippi Lu and said, "Rui, can you leave for a moment?" Chapter 924. Okay. Mississippi Lu nodded, closed the book, got up, and walked back to the room. Looking at her back that was so calm and unaffected, it seemed that she was really not interested in the matter at all. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. There must be something wrong when things are abnormal. With how much Rui cared about him, she would haggle over small things like a lip mark on his face, a strand of hair on his clothes, and staying out at night. How could she not be interested in his promise to another woman? What's more, this woman was her enemy. Princess Royal's expression was calm. She looked at him and asked, "Are you listening to me?" He found that he had made a mistake, a big mistake. When a woman was talking to him, he was thinking about another woman. Moreover, the woman he was thinking about was bigger than the one in front of him. He quickly turned his head and lowered his head, saying, "I'm listening. I'm listening. What did I say just now?" Li thought for a moment and said, "What did I promise you? I promised you a lot of things. Which one are you talking about? Other than not bringing soup to see you these few days, there's nothing wrong with what I've done. You promised me that you wouldn't act rashly." And Mingzu looked at him and said with a frown, "Do you know how dangerous this matter is and how big the impact will be? This case is not only shocking the capital, but the whole world. The officials are panicking, and all the civil and military officials in the court are asking for a thorough investigation of this case. What will you do if the truth is found out? You suspect that I did this case? Li Yi stood up and looked at her in surprise. I'm a little embarrassed when you say that. I didn't expect that I'm so powerful in your heart. In fact, I'm a little weaker than you think. Although those people are all guilty, there are still the authorities, the court. Mingzu looked at him and said solemnly, have you ever thought that if the Secret Intelligence Bureau finds out the truth, you'll have to face all the officials and nobles in the capital? If I don't have you, what will I do? Li Yi sighed. He originally wanted to cultivate her ability to do things on her own, but now it seemed that she was getting further and further away from this goal. Mississippi Lu walked over, picked up autumn water from the table, and said, you guys continue. After saying that, he simply turned around and walked back. Li Yi shook his head and asked, did His Majesty say anything? Father ordered the Secret Intelligence Bureau to investigate this case thoroughly, and all the officials and nobles who are guilty will be. And Mingzu looked at him, as if she had thought of something, and said in surprise, Father knows about this. It's precisely because this case has too many implications that we have enough power to drag the Chui family into this and uproot the Chui family and the King of Shu's faction. Li looked at her and asked, you don't want everyone to know that the King of Shu is not His Majesty's biological son, do you? She looked at Li Yi and asked, so, it was Father who instructed you to do this? Li Yi nodded. When? The day I entered the palace last time. This matter had to be carried out with lightning speed, leaving them no time to react. It was impossible for the imperial court to mobilize a large number of imperial guards to confiscate the property of the Chui family, and the capital would probably be in an uproar. Although this method was suspected of cheating, it was simple, direct, and violent. Moreover, it had the tacit consent of the old emperor, so the risk was minimal. The matter of the King of Shu could not be made known to everyone. This was not allowed by the imperial court. Therefore, there needed to be a reason to catch all these people in one fell swoop and not leave any loose ends. Under the leadership of the Lu League, the atmosphere in the martial arts world had changed greatly. Punishing the strong and helping the weak and helping the needy were actually working for the imperial court in disguise. This force was very powerful, but could not be directly used by the imperial court. A long time ago, he and the old emperor had reached an agreement on this force. And Mingzu looked at him, and a trace of disappointment appeared on her face. You and Father have already discussed this. Then, let's leave it at that. After saying this, she turned and walked out. Seeing the change in her expression, Li Yi hurriedly stood up and caught up with her. He said, I'm sorry, it's my fault. And Mingzu shook her head and said, you're not wrong. I'm wrong. You're not wrong. I'm really wrong. And Mingzu stopped and turned to look at him. She crossed her arms in front of her chest. Tell me, what did you do wrong? It was the greatest virtue to know one's mistake and correct it. After admitting his mistake, Li Yi shook his head and said, it's my fault to hide such a big thing from you. However, there are some things that you also hid from me. What things? Mingzu frowned slightly. She didn't even hide the time of her menstrual cycle from him. What else did she not tell him? She was sincere and sincere, but in exchange, she hid and suspected the person who was very important to him. It was hard to describe the feeling in words. What you hid from me is that you actually don't need to drink soup anymore. Li looked at her and said, if you weren't wrapped, Her Royal Highness went back and didn't mention the matter of hiding anymore. Mississippi Lu walked out of the room and returned to her original seat to read. Li glanced at her and reminded her, you're holding the book upside down. So Mississippi Lu stopped reading. She put the book on the table and began to look at him. Li explained, just now we talked about some matters of the court. Mississippi Lu asked, does the matter of the court also include the question, what will she do without you? Li looked at her and said seriously, I swear to God, the relationship between me and the eldest princess is very pure, just like the relationship between me and you. Mississippi Lou thought for a moment and couldn't help but remember that night when he was drunk and broke into the study in the middle of the night. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Cheen's mansion was Cheen's mansion after all. Even if they brought people from Cheen's mansion to be investigated, the people of the Intelligence Division still had a polite expression. "My lords, thank you for your trouble." Cheen Yan's face was pale and his eyes were lifeless. The two people behind him also had the same expression. Cheen Xiang seemed to have aged a lot overnight. When he walked up the stairs, his body swayed slightly. The Cheen family's fifth master immediately went up to support him. "There are steps. Be careful, father." The leader of the Intelligence Division walked up and said respectfully, "Don't worry, Prime Minister. The lords are only going to be investigated. If those people framed us, we will definitely send the lords back in one piece." Even after the people of the Intelligence Division left, Cheen Xiang's gaze was still fixed in that direction. He whispered, "What if it's not framed?" No one answered. The Cheen family's fifth master supported him and turned around. He whispered, "Father, it's windy outside. Let's go back." After the Cheen family's three influential officials walked out of Cheen's mansion, they never came back. Based on the confessions of the 40 people, the Intelligence Division effortlessly found the Devil's Den 30 miles away from the capital. They also found the dozens of missing women. When they pointed out that the place where they were previously hidden was the Cheen family's manor, the career of Cheen Xiang's eldest son, Cheen Yan, came to an end. Although the other two people's crimes were not as serious as Cheen Yan's, they were involved in several other cases. They couldn't stand up to the Intelligence Division's investigation and were imprisoned one after another. In just a few days, Cheen Xiang was the only one left in the court of the once glorious Cheen family. And this was not the end. As case after case was investigated, more and more people began to point fingers at the Chui family. In the Chui family's meeting hall, the atmosphere was bleak. From the nobles and officials to the common people, everyone's eyes were focused on the progress of this monstrous case. All the support they could obtain in the court was almost completely destroyed. Even if there was some left, it wouldn't be of much use. A middle-aged man had a panicked expression. He said, "Second brother, what should we do? Say something." Chui Qingming's eyes were bloodshot, but he still forced himself to remain calm. He murmured, "We still have the Empress and His Highness. His Highness will be back soon. The Chui family will not perish. The Chui family will not perish." Chapter 925. The capital city was chaotic these days, but it was chaotic in an orderly manner. The reason for the chaos was that since the founding of the Jing Kingdom, there had never been so many officials and nobles who fell from power at the same time in such a short period of time. The 40 or so people were just a prelude. According to their confessions, when the Secret Intelligence Bureau investigated the case, they dragged the Qin family and the Chui family into the water. Every day, people's houses would be searched and prisoner carts would pass through the streets. Such a big movement made the entire capital city a mess. The chaos was orderly because every time a position was vacant in the court, someone would quickly fill it, so it did not have much impact on the court. The promotion of this monstrous case was completely the general trend. Everyone in the world was watching. Once it started, it was like a surging river rushing forward, and there was no turning back. In fact, not many people paid attention to the thieves who had kidnapped these people from their homes. Flipping the table was really an addictive thing. It was simple, violent, and effective. Once people had enough power in their hands, they liked to take shortcuts and were unwilling to be bound by the rules of the world. This was not a good thing, and one should learn from it. However, this matter was originally agreed by the old emperor in advance. Now that the old emperor blamed him, it was completely like getting rid of the donkey after it was no longer of use. Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing, who was leaning against the bed, and said, "Your Majesty, you said that if normal methods don't work, we can use some extreme methods." The old emperor raised his eyebrows and looked at him. "I said extreme. I allowed you to arrest a few people to interrogate. Who asked you to arrest everyone? Since ancient times, kings were the most heartless." This sentence was not wrong at all. The emperor was the most temperamental person. It was clearly what he said, but in the blink of an eye, he did not admit it. It was simply like burning the bridge after crossing the river. Uprooting at this time, it was better not to refute. He lowered his head and ate the porridge, no longer saying anything. You have made such a big mess for me, and you still have the mood to eat porridge here. Jingdi looked at him and felt angry. He said, "Go to the Hall of Diligent Government and reflect for 2 hours. Think about what you did wrong this time." The emperor's words were like gold and jade. This bowl of porridge was probably not going to be finished. Li tore a chicken leg and hid it in his sleeve. He bowed and said, "This subject obeys your majesty." Looking at him slowly leaving, Emperor Jing coughed a few times and sighed, saying, "If everything could be broken like this, how much worry would I have?" As the emperor, he seemed to have the highest authority in the country. However, it was precisely because of his high authority that he was bound by many things. Changde closed the door and opened a window for ventilation. He said, "Your Majesty only needs to rest well. Leave these matters to them." In the end, the drumstick did not fall into Li's mouth. The proud Lolita fed Yongning a bite and then took a bite herself. She crossed her legs and sat opposite Li. She asked him when he would take her to the academy. The academy that Li gave her had been built. It was called the Shining Academy. The 14-year-old proud Lolita was not only the honorary dean, but she also held the real power of the academy. As for what she wanted to do, Li did not intend to care. However, with her temperament, he was afraid that when the novelty period was over, she would directly throw it to Imingzu. When he said that Imingzu had arrived, he had 2 hours to reflect. He only said that he could not leave the Hall of Diligent Government within these 2 hours. As for sleeping or eating hot pot in the Hall of Diligent Government, the old emperor did not say. The proud Lolita smelled the smell from afar. She got up from the ground and ran over barefoot. She asked excitedly, "Royal sister, what delicious food did you bring?" The royal princess put down the food box and opened it layer by layer. She placed it on the ground in front of Li and handed him a pair of chopsticks. "I don't think I ate much at Father's place just now. I asked the catering department to make this." This was the reason why he liked the royal princess. She could be in the imperial court and in the kitchen. Although she was cooking for someone else, her style was ever-changing. Who would not like her to be able to freely change from a domineering empress to a caring wife? Perhaps women were born with a few different faces. Even second Miss Liu, who had always been like an iceberg, was able to control several different styles in recent days, knowing that her royal sister and her husband had something to discuss. The proud Lolita took Yongning to the side to play. Li Imingzu took out a small wine pot and poured himself a cup. She asked, "Is there really nothing that you are afraid of?" He did not even let himself finish a bowl of porridge. Li was a little hungry. He asked as he picked up some food, "What do you mean? To be able to make so many officials and nobles disappear from their homes in one night?" Li Mingzu looked at him and said slowly, "In so many years, you are the first. They will not think that you're strong. They will only think that you are a threat. What do you think Father wants you to think about?" Li shook his head and said, "You are wrong about 2 things. The one who made them disappear wasn't me. It was His Majesty." He looked at Mingzu and said, "Moreover, there are things that I am afraid of and people. You are not even afraid of Father. Who are you afraid of?" "I am afraid of Lu Rui." Li Mingzu looked at him and asked why. "She will hit me," Li said honestly. "If you're like her, I will also be afraid of you." He actually understood the royal princess worries. The nobles were the most arrogant group of people. Compared to the common people, they were the upper class. They had always lived at the top of the food chain. It had always been them who kidnapped others. When did it become others' turn to kidnap them? Now it really was. The incident this time made them understand that even if they lived in the capital and had so-called martial arts skilled guards at home, it was not enough to guarantee their safety. It was very possible that in the blink of an eye, they would be transported from their own home to some other place. They would not think that the thieves were powerful. They would only think that they were a great threat. If they could not resolve this threat as soon as possible, they would not be able to eat or sleep in peace. This was not something that could be explained by the old emperor's trust and tacit approval. This capital, this country, was still in the hands of the upper class. If the matter was made clear, they could no longer stay in the capital. They could only take Rui, and Xiao Huan back to their old business. Li Yi shook his head and looked at her. Don't worry. This kind of thing will only happen once. Then he saw the proud Lolita walk over with the wine pot in her arms. She smiled foolishly and said, Sir, how did you become two? Li and Mingzu looked to her side. The wine pot had already disappeared. The drunk proud Lolita was spanked and sent back to her room to sleep. Li Yi accompanied Yongning and spoke in a language that only the two of them could understand. When it was time, he said goodbye to her and left the imperial palace. The Chui family and the King of Shu's faction had lost their power. Although they had not been completely uprooted, he still felt that there was something the old emperor had not let him and Mingzi know. And that matter would probably be the last straw that broke the Chui family's back. Li Yi met Qinchong at the gate of the Zeng residence. Qinchong looked at him and asked, It should be over, right? Li Yi shook his head. When it ends is up to His Majesty. Right now, it is only the beginning. Chapter 926. For the Chui family, what was happening now was really just the beginning. Just the fact that the King of Shu was not the biological son of the emperor was enough to send the entire Chui family, including noble consort Chui, to hell. Although the truth had not been revealed, the lightest punishment was the crime of deceiving the emperor and stealing the country. If it was more serious, no one knew which was more serious, deceiving the emperor or lying to him. But no matter which one it was, everyone related to the Chui family would not be able to escape. Chun Chang's expression changed several times and finally turned pale. Looking at Li Yi, he bowed and said, Thank you. Li Yi nodded and turned to walk into the Zeng residence. When Drunk Ink saw him come in, she quickly hid the wedding dress in her hand. Li Yi did not ask much. Her wedding dress was all embroidered, and it would be done in a few days. There was no hurry to do it in a day or two. He opened his mouth, but before he could say a word, Goddess Luo Shui walked in with the wedding dress and said, The guys talk first. I'll go in and finish the painting. Li looked at her back in surprise, then looked at Ruoqing and asked, What's wrong with her recently? Wan Ruoqing shook her head, her pretty face showing the same puzzlement. Li Yi frowned. Miss Zeng had been a little unusual recently. The last time he came, she said she was not feeling well and needed to rest, so she asked Ruoqing to chat with him. The last time, she said she had a stomachache and went back to her room to rest alone, so she asked Ruoqing to chat with him. But Li knew very well that there was still at least half a month before her stomachache. The last time, she said she stayed up all night to embroider the wedding dress and was too tired. She wanted to go back to her room to rest, so it was Ruoqing who talked with him. The last time, there were too many examples to mention. Something must have happened, something he did not know. Could it be premarital anxiety? Thinking about it, it seemed very likely. Many women would suffer from this disease before they got married because it was due to some kind of psychological factor. Different people showed different symptoms. Perhaps the symptom she displayed was avoidance? Li Yi waved at Xiao Chui and waited for her to come over before asking, Has your family's young miss been behaving strangely recently? No. After Xiao Chui thought about it, she shook her head and said, It's the same as before. There's nothing strange. After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something and patted his head, saying, If there is anything, it would be that Miss has been sleeping in Sister Ruoqing's room these past few days. It has been a long time since she slept alone. Li Yi looked at Wan Ruoqing. She nodded slightly and said, She said that she's moving away soon and asked me to accompany her. There's nothing strange about that. Li Yi suddenly looked at her and asked, When she slept with you, did she touch you? What touch? Wan Ruoqing asked doubtfully. Then she was stunned and blushed. Drunk Mo's personality was very active. She liked to play on the bed and was not obedient when she slept. Sometimes, something that made people blush would indeed happen. Seeing the blush on her face, he couldn't help but imagine some scenes in his mind. Then his face turned a little red and then a little white. He turned to look at Juan Ruaching with a complicated expression. Drunk Mo was his, and Ruaching would be his sooner or later. The situation now was that the two of them slept on the same bed and often did things that made people blush. Who liked who? Who cheated on who? And who let down who? No, he needed to think about this problem. The capital had been very turbulent these days. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a monstrous wave. Even the powerful Chui clan and Qin clan, although they did not fall apart, were on the verge of collapse. As for the other smaller clans, under such a huge wave, not even their corpses were left. The Qin clan had always been very close to the Chui clan and was only slightly inferior to the Qin clan. It was really a miracle that they were not affected in the slightest by this storm. At this time, in the Chun clan, the atmosphere was not as relaxed as everyone thought. It's just the beginning, just the beginning. Chun Qing paced in the hall and said with a sullen face, "If this is just the beginning, then to what extent will it be considered to be the end?" Chun Chong sat on the chair. His expression was much calmer than his. He raised his head and looked outside. Perhaps we still have to add in the king of Shu, or even that person in the palace, before it will be considered to be the end. Chun Xing turned his head and said in disbelief, "How is this possible?" Chun Chong shook his head and said, "If this is just the beginning, then this time, no matter what, the Chun clan will not be able to escape." He looked at Chun Xing and said, "There has to be one person in the Chun clan who has to stand up. I'm not here anymore. In the future, take good care of third sister. If you encounter any problems that you can't solve, go find him." No. Chun Xing decided to cut him off. "Even if someone has to go, it will be me. You stay behind to take care of third sister. This matter is decided. Big brother, you still have hope." Chun Chong looked at him and said, "Let me bear the Chun clan's past alone." Chun Xing's expression was cold. He shook his head and said, "No, this definitely won't do. Big brother, second brother." As the two of them were arguing, a delicate figure walked in from the door. Their expressions changed, and they said at the same time, "Third sister, why are you here?" Chun Chong walked over and said hurriedly, "I have something to discuss with Big Brother. You should go back and rest first." The girl with snow-white hair shook her head, but a smile appeared on her face. She said firmly, "I'm also a member of the Qin clan. No matter what happens, Miao, you will face it together with Big Brother and Second Brother." Chun Chong looked at her, patted her hand, and strode out of the door. "This official is guilty." In front of a certain hall in the Imperial Palace, Chun Chong knelt down and said loudly, "Chun clan." On the couch, Jing Di put down the booklet in his hand and shook his head in disappointment. "Let Mingzi handle this matter." The 9-month-old Li Duan could already crawl everywhere. Even when the eldest princess walked in, He was still tirelessly moving him from the side of the bed to the inside of the bed. When he crawled out, she would repeat this action. She probably had something to discuss with him at this time. Li carried the little fellow and passed him to Rui. Li Duan, on the other hand, reached out his little hand to Xiao Huan. In this family, the little fellow was like an emperor, but the emperor also had someone he was afraid of, and that person was Lu Rui. Mississippi, Lu might be born with a kind of deterrence. Usually, when she looked at Li Duan, he absolutely did not dare to cry or pester her. "Xiao Huan, let's go out." Mississippi Lu glanced at Xiao Huan and got up to leave. Xiao Huan held Li Duan and went out obediently. Mingzu handed him a booklet and said, "Take a look at this." He opened the booklet and read it carefully. He lowered his head and asked in a low voice, "If it is judged normally, what will be the result?" "The Chen clan has a lot of evidence of crimes." Mingzu looked at him and said, "Although the House of Duke will still be considered, the death penalty can be avoided, but the punishment cannot be avoided. In the direct line, the men will be exiled and the women will be reduced to lowly status and put into the musical house." She looked at Li and said, "So, I'm here to ask for your opinion. Does this count as abusing power for personal gain? Yes. However, she looked at Li Yi and said, leniency for those who confess, severity for those who resist. Chun Chong turned himself in, and, according to the law, he should also be punished according to the circumstances. Li Yi knew that with her character, it would not be easy for her to make such a decision. But he absolutely could not watch Miss Chen fall into such a situation. His heart was slightly warmed. He held her hand and said seriously, "Thank you for this." Emingzu shook her head. "There is no need to say thank you between us." Mississippi Lu came in from outside, walked to the bed, and picked up the autumn water that had fallen here. Then she looked at the two of them, and her eyes stopped on their hands that were held together. She asked, "What happened between you?" Chapter 927. He was a little worried. No, he was very worried. Mississippi Lu's memory was getting worse and worse. She used to like autumn water so much. Her sword never left her body. She liked autumn water even more than she liked him, but now she actually forgot autumn water again and again. This was not normal, too abnormal. It was a bad memory. But how old was she? She was in the prime of her life. Li could be sure that before he became senile and forgot things, Mississippi Lu would never reach this step first. Maybe in the future, she and Rui would take turns pushing the wheelchair under the sunset, and he would be the one sitting in the wheelchair. What a beautiful and harmonious scene. The scene in front of him was not very harmonious. Mississippi Lu came back to get autumn water. He held the Princess Royal's hand with a face full of affection. In fact, this time it was really out of instinct, without any impurities. Emingzu was such an upright person that she could not tolerate any dirt in her eyes. It was not easy for her to sacrifice herself for the country and make such concessions for his feelings. Words could not express the gratitude in his heart, so he added a little body movement. Coincidentally, it was seen by Mississippi Lu. She usually guarded against Emingzu like a wolf. If he could not explain it clearly this time, he would not be able to cross this hurdle in his life. So Li reached out and held Mississippi Lu's hand and said calmly, "There is something. Emingzu helped us a lot. I just want to thank her, that's all. Between us, there is nothing." He looked at the two slender white hands on his left and right and said, "It's just holding hands to thank her." Li felt that he was very smart. It was not easy to explain to Mississippi Lu while holding the Princess Royal's hand. But holding two people's hands at the same time, she would not think that he had the same feelings for her as Emingzu, right? Simple? Mississippi Lu curled her lips. Nothing. The Princess Royal shook her head. Hearing a scream from inside the house, Xiaohuan hurriedly ran in, grabbed Li Yi's hand, and hurriedly said, "Son-in-law, what happened? Don't move." Li Yi watched as Mississippi Lu and the Princess Royal left. His expression twitched slightly. He shook his hands hard, and the pain in his hands lessened a little. Two violent women. It was just a handshake. Was there a need to use so much strength? Both of his hands were numb after the pain. Li Yi suspected that the bones in his hands were crushed. If he did not take revenge, he would not be a gentleman. A gentleman's revenge was never too late. 10 years later, he would make them beg for mercy. Seeing Li Yi's pained expression, Xiaohuan asked worriedly, young master, what's wrong?" Fong leaned against the door and looked outside. He retracted his gaze and said with a smile, "Don't worry, it's just that extreme joy turns to sorrow. The injury this time was considered a work injury." As the Minister of State, he had a disagreement with the Princess Royal during a discussion of state affairs and was injured by her. Therefore, he could have a long time to recuperate. The case that the old emperor ordered him to investigate had expired, but he did not find anything. Fortunately, the criminals found their conscience and turned themselves in, so he did not have to worry about it anymore. The Chui family had fallen. When a tree falls, the monkeys scatter. In their hearts, they were still hoping for the return of the king of Shu to make a comeback. The Qin family had also fallen. Ever since the Qin brothers were imprisoned, Prime Minister Qin fell ill and did not attend court for a long time. The Qin family was different from the past. Compared to other criminals, their crimes were minor, but they could not be easily pardoned. Considering that High Duke Chun had contributed to the country in his early years, and that he was now old and sick, and that the Chun family had turned themselves in, the punishment was reduced. All the official titles of the Chun family were removed, and they were reduced to commoners. The House of Duke was confiscated, and all their assets were confiscated. This punishment seemed severe, but to the Chun family, it was already a mercy beyond the law. This was all he could do. It was impossible for the Chun family to return to its former glory, but if they could avoid those power struggles in the future and live a stable life, it might not be a bad thing. All their assets were confiscated. From a wealthy family, they suddenly became poor. This huge difference was not something that ordinary people could bear. Li wanted to help them, but Chun Chong rejected him. He still hated the Li family, and he was even more unwilling to be pitied by the Li family. This was something that Li could understand. Therefore, he only asked people to pay more attention in the dark. When a family was at its peak, there were many people who would add flowers to the brocade, and when it was down, there were many people who would hit it when it was down. He still saw third Miss Chun often. Sometimes he would go to the Chun family to see her, either alone or with Rui. Sometimes he would go to Zue Mo's place. The great change in the Chun family not only did not break her down, but Li felt that she looked much better, which was something to be happy about. Fong squatted in front of him. He seemed to be thinking of something, and he kept giggling. After Xiao Hong entered the family, Fong's sister-in-law was even more strict with him than before, except for Xiao Hong, who was like a sister to Wanru. Fong was actually enjoying himself, which made Li wonder if he had serious masochistic tendencies. A good man had become a masochist for no reason. After being by his side for so long, if this guy could learn a little of his good qualities, he would not have ended up like this. Fong suddenly seemed to think of something. He stopped giggling, looked up at him, and said, "Young master, that guy Wu Er, it seems like he is not coming back. Let him be." He waved his hand, not caring at all. To leave or to stay. That was Wu Er's choice, and only he could feel it. He would not interfere too much. Under the persuasion of Xiao Huan and the others, Lu Mei stayed and was like a sister to Xiao Hong. Xiao Hong called her Sister Mei, and Lu Mei called Fong Uncle Fong. He did not know if Fong, in front of his niece and sister, felt that he was a beast for a moment or a few moments. Although the storm in the capital was big, no matter how big the storm, there would be a day when it would calm down. Confiscation of property, removal of officials, exile. For the whole of June and July, this was the mainstream in the capital. Until August, the upcoming Mid-Autumn Festival seemed to have calmed down all the waves. The people were extremely satisfied with the recent actions of the imperial court and began to put more attention on the Mid-Autumn Festival. However, the people did not wait for the 15th of August, but Prince Ning first. Prince Ning, who had left the capital a few months ago, returned again. This time, he did not come back alone. After Prince Ning's carriage, a row of dozens of prison carriages drove into the capital. The people of the capital stood on both sides of the road, looking at the several li-long procession passing through the street, all showing shock in their eyes. The Li family. Rui and the Crown Princess made an appointment to go to the Cold Mountain Temple to pray for the safety of the little fellow and the girl from Li Xian's family. After Li Duan woke up, he cried nonstop. Li Yi, with a headache, stuffed him into Rui's arms. The crying stopped abruptly, and Xiao Huan looked on enviously. Second Miss was indeed suitable to look after children. Her Royal Highness came in from outside. Rui glanced at Xiao Huan, stood up, and walked outside. Mississippi Liu was becoming more and more considerate. Li felt gratified. As if thinking of something, he suddenly said, "Rui, wait a moment." Mississippi Liu turned her head to look at him. Li picked up the sword she had placed by the bed, walked over, and handed it to her, saying, "You forgot your sword." Chapter 928. It was not a good habit to leave things behind, especially if it was something valuable. It was better to carry it with you. Based on how much Mississippi Lu liked autumn water, if this sword was lost, how sad would she be? Fortunately, she usually left it at home by his side. If she left it outside, it would be hard to find it again. Now that the morals of the world were deteriorating, people's hearts were not what they used to be. Not everyone could pick up a sword without concealing it, and it would be hard to find it again. So he needed to help her form a good habit again. Seeing that she was stunned, he grabbed her arm, put autumn water in her hand, and said, "Remember, don't forget next time." After Mississippi Lu and Xiao Huan left, Mingzu walked over and closed the door. Li Yi took a few steps back and immediately became vigilant. Why did she close the door when they were talking nicely? Every time he saw the action of closing the door, he faintly felt some pain in his butt. He called this Mississippi Lu's sequela. Although Mingzu had been influenced by Mississippi Lu recently and had a tendency to become violent, she probably wouldn't close the door and beat him. After all, except for the last time when he couldn't help but touch her hand, he didn't do anything out of line. And because of the last time, his hand was still a little weak. If it wasn't to beat him, then why did she close the door? Could it be he couldn't beat her in a fight? If she really wanted to do something, he could only struggle for a while, and in the end, he might still succumb to her despotic power. Just as Li was thinking about what posture to use to resist, Mingzu finally spoke. "Uncle Ning is back." Seeing that she sat down at the table and didn't seem to have any intention of using despotic power, Li Yi was a little disappointed and asked, "Prince Ning returned to the capital. When did it happen?" "Just now." Mingzu poured a cup of tea for herself and said the Chui clan, more than 260 people, were all escorted to the capital, and the officials in Shuzhou who had been recruited by the king of Shu were also escorted back by Uncle Ning and locked in the Supreme Court's heavenly prison. "What did you say?" Li Yi's hand stopped in midair as he stared at her blankly. From the beginning to the end, they had regarded the king of Shu and the Chui family as their greatest enemies. In recent days, they had achieved a gradual victory in the war against the enemy. The Chui family had fallen, and the remaining forces of the Chui family were nothing to be feared. The only thing the king of Shu could rely on was his status as a prince. However, this title also carried quite a bit of weight. This was because the news that he was not a prince could not be made public, and he was still the first prince in the eyes of the commoners and officials. If he wanted to achieve complete victory, he had to use other methods. No wonder before they knew that the king of Shu was not the biological son of the old emperor. They felt that he was not the biological son of the old emperor. Even without the matter of the king of Shu, the Chui family wouldn't have the last laugh, because there would always be such a knife waiting for them on the road ahead. The difference was whether the saber was struck early or late, and whether it would hurt the saber itself when the saber was struck. Li finally understood why the old emperor had been so supportive of his work of attacking the Chui family and the king of Shu. Because over the years, under the efforts of him and Mingzu, the power of the Chui family had gradually weakened. Until a few days ago, the Chui family had almost become a commander without an army. It was as easy and effortless as cutting tofu. He thought for a while and asked again, "What about the matter of the king of Shu?" For them, concubine Chui could only give birth to a prince. Just in case, the Chui family bribed the midwife and palace maids in advance and sent a newborn baby boy into the palace. Mingzu shook her head and said, "Concubine Chui did give birth to a prince, but the prince died as soon as he was born. The king of Shu was the baby boy that the Chui family secretly sent into the palace." She picked up the teacup and said, "After the king of Shu escaped and all the people of the Chui family were escorted to the capital, Chui Qingzi knew that there was no hope, so he confessed everything. The imperial palace was heavily guarded. It was as difficult as ascending to heaven to send a baby boy into the palace quietly and exchange it with the prince born by the concubine. The Chui family could even do this, so it was absolutely not an injustice for them to end up like this." He raised his head and asked, "These things can't be easily done by the Chui family alone, can they? After today, how many people will be dealt with in the capital?" Imingzu put down the teacup and said, "Those who should be dealt with have been dealt with." Li was puzzled for a moment, but he understood immediately. By now, almost all the forces related to the Chui family had been wiped out. There was probably no fish that could escape the net. He had thought of many possibilities before, but he didn't expect the truth to be so complicated. This time, the Chui family had completely fallen, and their forces in the court had been completely purged. The king of Shu also couldn't wait for him to return to the capital. He looked at Imingzu and saw the confusion in her eyes. Without the Chui family and the king of Shu, they had no opponents. What should they do now? Life suddenly lost its direction, just like a salted fish that had lost its dream. In the courtyard, Mississippi Lou was wiping the tears in her eyes and glancing at the closed door from time to time. Chapter 9:29. The fall of the Chui family and the escape of the king of Shu gave Li Yi the feeling of a fist that had gathered its strength and was about to swing, but suddenly lost its target. If they had known that the old emperor had planned to flip the table, they would not have made the unnecessary move of knocking on the doors of the nobles. Assassinating the legitimate son of the royal family and pretending to be the eldest son of the emperor, unlike the crime of the Green ruler. If these two crimes were made public, although they would still cause a great commotion, the old emperor would not lose too much face. He was an emperor, and he was also a man. For a man, what could be more humiliating than wearing a green hat on his head? But thinking about it carefully, it could not be said that they had made unnecessary moves. If not for this incident, the capital would have been in even greater turmoil. Only by smoothing out the source of the turmoil in advance could the people and the court be stabilized. The fall of the Chui family was a good thing, but it also brought a new problem. The throne had to be inherited. It was said that women's thoughts were difficult to guess, but Li Yi felt that men's thoughts were even more difficult to guess. Who did the old emperor want to pass the throne to? Why did he hide it so well? Imingzu thought for a long time before looking at him and saying, "Let nature take its course in the future." Li Yi knew the hesitation and struggle in her heart. In fact, she had not really made up her mind. Once she embarked on that path, there would be no lack of blood, and the person she would have to face in the end was her father. Li Yi nodded and did not say anything more. If she could not overcome the obstacle in her heart, no matter how hard others tried, it would be of no use. Fortunately, things were different now. After the fall of the Chui family and the loss of hope for the king of Shu, their situation was much better than before. After seeing off the eldest princess, he paced in the courtyard to relieve the depression in his heart. He had been full of energy and had made preparations for everything, but the Chui family had suffered a setback. It was difficult to release the energy in his heart, and it was very uncomfortable. Seeing him pacing back and forth in the courtyard with a gloomy face, Xiao Huan came over and asked with concern, "Son-in-law, what's wrong?" Li Yi sat down by the stone table and shook his head, saying, "There's always a feeling of having energy, but nowhere to use it. You have a strength, but nowhere to use it." On the opposite side, Mississippi Lou had finished wiping her eyes and sheathed her sword. She looked up at him and asked, "Can I help you?" Li looked at the expression on her face and replied without any hesitation, "No need." Mississippi Lou stood up and waved her hand. "We're family. You're welcome," Li Yi said with an extremely solemn expression. "There's really no need. I have a strength but nowhere to use it. It's so uncomfortable to hold it in. I'll just vent it out. I don't have anything to do now anyway. I really don't need to trouble you." It was very strange. Maybe because of her reminder, Li Xian came over. When Mississippi Lou went out, she didn't forget to bring autumn water with her. "Have you heard? The entire Chui family has been escorted to the capital." Looking at his excited and shocked expression, Li Yi nodded and said, "I heard. Imingzu just told me." "Why? You don't even know what your father has done?" Li Xian shook his head and sat down to drink a cup of tea. He said, "Father didn't tell me when he left. How would I know?" After saying this, a curious expression appeared on his face. He asked, "What should we do next?" Li Yi was puzzled. "What should we do?" The Chui family has fallen, and the king of Shu has fled to escape punishment. This is our best chance. Li Xian looked at him and frowned. Take advantage of this opportunity to rope in the court officials and befriend the family of generals. Let Mingzu move forward. He looked at Li Yi and asked with some dissatisfaction, how can you be a military advisor if you don't seize this kind of opportunity? Li Yi had discovered a long time ago that Li Xian was absolutely warm-hearted. If Mingzu was the calm emperor, then he must be the anxious eunuch by the emperor's side. It was a pity that when it came to being an emperor, those who should be anxious were not anxious. It was useless for those who should not be anxious to be anxious. Li shook his head and said, why don't you talk to Mingzu? Mingzu only listens to you. Li Xian took another sip of tea and looked at him. He asked, sit down and talk. Are you tired of standing? Li Yi rubbed his butt and said, it's okay. I like to stand. These days, the capital was in a constant state of turmoil. Drama after drama was played out. Families fell one after another and rose up, including the Chui family, the Qin family, and the Chun family. They were either destroyed or declined. The degree of excitement was so great that even the news show and the brothel couldn't compare to it. Compared to these shocking things, the fact that the Qin family's young Duke Qin had absconded out of fear of punishment for kidnapping a woman and had yet to be arrested and brought to justice was not so important. These days, the Qin family was much more deserted. It was not only because autumn had arrived and the leaves had withered and fallen, but also because the world had become desolate. The most important reason was because 4 of the 5 Qin brothers had been imprisoned in recent days, and their families had been separated. Now that Prime Minister Qin had fallen ill, the Qin family had dismissed some of the servant girls and servants. The entire estate was even less lively. Fifth Lord. Hello, Fifth Lord. Greetings, Fifth Lord. 2 figures walked out from the depths of the small path. Along the way, the Qin family servants who met them hurriedly bowed. Wu Er swept a withered leaf off the shoulder of a middle-aged man in front of him and asked, Fifth Lord, are we still going to the brothel to watch the show today? Yes. The Qin family's Fifth Lord nodded and said, but it's not the brothel. Let's go somewhere else today. Outside the capital, by a desolate river. The river was overgrown with weeds, and few people were there. The reeds were as tall as a person. A broken wooden boat was anchored there. No one knew how long it had been there. In the canopy of the wooden boat, a person lay limp there like a puddle of mud. His hair was unkempt and his face was dirty. His clothes were ragged, and his limbs were bent at a strange angle. If it weren't for the hair that covered his face still moving rhythmically, no one would think he was a living person. However, he really was a living person. He bit a piece of porcelain in his mouth. He bent down and laboriously cut the rope in his hand. The sound of footsteps came from outside. He put the porcelain piece into his mouth and stared ahead with lifeless eyes. A beam of light appeared in the canopy because someone had lifted the heavy curtain and walked in from outside. He ignored the stench in the canopy, walked to Qin Yu's side, and crouched down. The Qin family has fallen to such a state. He looked at Qin Yu and said in a small voice, This is what you've always wanted, right? A glimmer of emotion finally appeared in Qin Yu's turbid eyes. Your mother's death back then, I was powerless. The Qin family's Fifth Lord looked at him and said, I am only Qin Wu. Before me, there was still Qin Yi, Qin Air, Qin San, and Qin Si. It's not up to me to decide these things, although you are very pitiful. He looked into his eyes and said, But this is not a reason for you to do other things. After whispering a few words, he stood up and looked at Qin Yu. He asked, These days have been very hard, haven't they? I won't in the future. He shook his head. As he walked out of the canopy, he turned his head and said, We will meet again in the next life. In the river, the wooden boat flowing downstream ignited into a raging fire. The flames soared into the sky. Chapter 9:30. A few figures stood by the river, watching the fire that soared into the sky gradually disappear downstream. A burly man suddenly said, Fifth Master, should we send someone to follow him and have a look? If he can survive, it can be considered as good fortune. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "What's more, he is a member of the Qin family after all. It's not a big deal for him to die in the hands of a member of the Qin family. How can you say it's good fortune?" The burly man scratched his head and said, "If we let him escape, what if he comes back in a few years or decades to take revenge? That's how it is in the opera. After suffering all kinds of humiliation, he will endure the humiliation and finally put on a show of revenge. Opera is just opera. Endure the humiliation and revenge. How can it be as simple as you make it out to be?" The burly man scratched his head and said, "Why do I feel that this kind of trick has appeared in more than just opera?" The middle-aged man thought about it and said, "Let's send someone to have a look." The Supreme Court's prison. There were many prisons in the capital city. Ordinary criminals could be locked up in the prisons of the county government and the prefectural government. Only when there were major cases or extremely vicious criminals would the Ministry of Justice take action. If the case involved officials and nobles in the capital city, it would usually be handed over to the Supreme Court. The people involved in the case of the Chui family and the King of Shu were locked up in the Supreme Court's prison. In front of the Supreme Court, the Chancellor, who had just received the news, hurriedly came out and bowed. "Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness," and Lord Li, "At ease." "Thank you, Princess." Li Yi and the other two did not come to the Chui family to laugh at them. Although Chui Qingze had confessed all the crimes, many details of the case still needed to be investigated. Li Yi and the others just followed Lu Yidong to have a look. After all, the Chui family was locked up in the prison, an opponent they had been fighting against for years. In the prison, there was a lot of wailing. When they passed through the prison, the sound was even more ear-piercing, as if it was going to pierce through their eardrums. It was only when they entered the innermost cell that the voices gradually became softer. Chui Qingming, who had just taken over the Chui family, was no longer as high-spirited as before. He was wearing a white prison uniform, his hair was disheveled, and his face was dirty. He was chained to the cell. When the cell door opened, he raised his head to take a look, but quickly lowered it again. There was no expression on his face. Chui Qingming was a sinister and ruthless person. In order to achieve his goals, he would not hesitate to use any means. If he didn't meet an opponent who would flip the table at the slightest disagreement, he could barely be considered as a treacherous hero. His mouth was also extremely tight. No matter how Lu Yizhong asked, he did not reveal a single word. An official from the Supreme Court could not help but say in a low voice, "Sir, to deal with such stubborn criminals, torture is the most effective way." Lu Yi waved his hand. "Take me to Chui Qingze's cell." Chui Qingze was the former head of the Chui family. He knew as much as Chui Qingming, but his temperament was not like Chui Qingming's, so he was a good breakthrough point. Lu Yi had always adhered to the principle of not using torture unless it was absolutely necessary. When he broke this principle, he would definitely leave an unforgettable memory for the criminal he was interrogating. County Marquis Li, when they walked out of the cell, Chui Qingming suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Li Yi." Mingzu and Li Xian turned around at the same time. Chui Qingming still lowered his head and said no more. Li looked at them and said, "You go first. Be careful." Mingzu looked at him a little, nodded, and turned to leave. Li Xian's face was full of curiosity. Chui Qingming clearly wanted to say something only to Li Yi, but if he wanted to say it, he did not want to say in front of him. The fire of curiosity burned in his heart, but he could only leave with Mingzu. Li Yi walked in front of Chui Qingming. He still did not raise his head and said in a low voice, "That thing, it was you who did it, right?" Li Yi didn't know which incident he was talking about, but the things that happened to the Chui family, which one of them wasn't his doing. No matter which incident Chui Qingming was talking about, he wouldn't be wrongly accused. Chui Qingming raised his head slightly. "More than 40 dignitaries were kidnapped by you. Forcing the King of Shu to leave the capital was also your doing. The downfall of the Yu family and the Chu family was driven by you behind the scenes. It was you who turned Liuli into glass and almost shook the foundation of the Chui family. I never thought that even Sung Shichen, I'm afraid that you have something on him." Li Yi shook his head. You really misunderstood this. Lord Sang did it voluntarily. That's called abandoning darkness for light. Abandoning darkness for light? These words can only deceive a 3-year-old child. Chui Qingming smiled disdainfully. What is light and what is darkness? Winner is king and loser is thief. The winner is light and the loser is dark. Li Yi looked down at him. You call me here just to say this? A smile suddenly appeared on Chui Qingming's face. Do you really think that you have one? Li Yi did not speak because he knew that Chui Qingming had not finished speaking. I admit that you are very powerful. If His Highness the King of Shu had not provoked you, the Chui family and himself would not have fallen into this situation today. Chui Qingming shook his head and said, You have indeed done it. Step by step, you have pushed the King of Shu further and further away from that position. You have pulled out the tendons of the Chui family one by one. You can control what the people say and what they do. You can make all the officials and dignitaries in the capital unable to sleep well. You can force the eldest prince out of the capital. In front of you, the century-old families are nothing but chickens and dogs. But do you really think that you have one? Although your surname is Li, you are not that Li. Chui Qingming sneered, and the expression on his face immediately became ferocious. He said in a cold tone, The more you win now, the worse you will lose in the future. How many days does His Majesty have left? Even if the King of Shu cannot ascend to the throne, there will always be other princes to replace him. How can they tolerate people like you appearing in the capital, in the Jing Kingdom? The day the new emperor ascends to the throne will be the day you die. And there is the eldest princess. Haha, do you think that you will be safe with the protection of the eldest princess? After a few days, she will not even be able to protect herself. How can she protect you? The sneer on his face gradually turned into a wild laughter. Li Yi, County Marquis Li, Dr. Li, I will wait for you in the underworld. Going early doesn't mean that you're doing well. Li Yi looked at him and shook his head. He said, It is not easy to build a foundation in the underworld. Guarding it well is the right way. Don't wait for me. Li Xian leaned on the wall outside a prison cell and muttered, The relationship of the Chui family is really messy. The third son of the Chui family actually has an affair with the eldest sister-in-law. Although Lu Yi was investigating a serious case, there would always be some indecent things mixed in a serious case. He only asked a servant of the Chui family to point out the crimes of the Chui family in order to reduce the punishment. But he didn't expect that such a scandal would break out. He was surprised for a while and looked at Imingzu. He saw that she was staring at the front in a daze. She seemed to be in a trance. He doubtfully asked, Imingzu, what are you looking at? Iming's hand was swaying in front of her eyes. Imingzu finally came back to her senses. She shook her head and said, It's nothing. I was thinking about something. Li Yi walked out of the prison cell in the distance. Li Xian hastily ran over and curiously asked, What did Chui Qingming say to you? He said that he will not be able to escape this time. He asked me to burn more paper money for him. Why? Li Xian curled his lips and said, It is not your turn to burn paper money. Just don't burn it. He has no clothes to wear and no money to spend in the underworld. And Mingzu looked at Li Yi. Her lips slightly opened as if she wanted to say something. But in the end, she didn't say anything. Li Yi smiled and didn't continue this topic. He casually pointed to another area in the prison and asked, It is noisy over there. Who are the people locked up there? An official of the Supreme Court hurriedly stepped forward and said, Those are the officials of Shu Prefecture who surrendered to the King of Shu. They followed him and did a lot of evil things. After we finish dealing with the Chui family, we will deal with them. Chapter 9:31. The case of the Chui family and the King of Shu was the most influential and large-scale case in the Jing Kingdom in the past few decades. Not only were dozens of officials and nobles in the capital city imprisoned, but the officials in Shuzhou who were involved in the case were also escorted to the capital city and locked up in the Supreme Court's prison. In one night, they were reduced from high and mighty officials to prisoners. No one knew what awaited them. If they were only to resign, it would be a blessing in disguise. Even if they were exiled to the army, it would not be a difficult thing to accept. However, if they were too deeply involved with the king of Shu, they would be sent directly to the guillotine. If that happened, there would really be nothing left. At this time, in a cell somewhere in the heavenly prison, a young man clutched his abdomen. Cold sweat seeped from his forehead, and his body trembled. Xian, Xian, what's wrong with you? In the cell next door, a woman's face was full of anxiety. She tightly grasped the bars in the middle and asked with concern. The young man's forehead was full of cold sweat, but he raised his head and smiled as he waved his hand, saying, "It's nothing, it's just an old problem." The woman looked at the young man who was sweating profusely, turned her head, and with a thud, she knelt down and said in a hoarse voice, "Sir, Xian's stomach is not good. Please, please don't give him moldy food anymore." The officer looked back and said expressionlessly, "It's already come to this. Why are you still being picky?" The woman weakly collapsed to the ground. In another cell, someone disdainfully mocked, "This is the Supreme Court's heavenly prison. If you want to eat well, I'm afraid you'll only get that last meal." In the Jing Kingdom, no matter where the prison was, there was an unwritten rule. Before the execution, prisoners could enjoy a sumptuous meal, known as the last meal. This was in the hope that the prisoner could eat his fill and be reincarnated into a good family in the next life. The moment the prisoner ate the last meal, it meant that the prisoner was not far from the execution. As soon as that person's mocking voice fell, the sound of iron chains being lowered suddenly came from the door of a cell. A few prison guards opened the cell door and moved a set of tables and chairs in. Then someone brought in wine and delicacies. The smell of the wine and dishes could be smelled from far away. 8 dishes and 1 soup. The prisoner who had spoken just now counted and fell to the ground weakly. This aroma was not something that the moldy and rancid food they usually ate could compare to. Under what circumstances would the prison give the prisoners such preferential treatment? The last meal, this was the last meal. The last meal for the Jiang County lieutenant had arrived. Could it be far from theirs? The woman grabbed the railing with both hands and said in a panic, "Xian, and Lord Jiang, please." 2 jailers helped the young man up and sat him down at the table. Jiang Xian stared blankly at the sumptuous meal in front of him, but he had no appetite at all. Just now, when his stomach hurt, he thought that if he could have a full meal, it would be worth it even if he died. Men were always fickle. He was already regretting it now. He didn't want good wine and good food, and he didn't want to have a full meal. Even if he had to eat moldy and rancid food every day, he would be willing, as long as he was alive, as long as he could live. Jiang Xian struggled to sit up and shook his head. "I don't want to eat. I don't want to eat." "Why? Are these dishes not to Brother Jiang's taste?" Li walked into the cell and said in surprise, "It doesn't matter. What do you want to eat, Brother Jiang? Just tell me, and I will ask someone to make it again." This voice was very familiar, so familiar that it was engraved in his bones. Jiang Xian turned his head and saw a figure walking into the cell. His whole body froze in place, as if he had been struck by lightning. Brother Li. He walked into the cell and personally helped him to the table. He said with a smile, "Brother Jiang, long time no see." Li Xian and Mingzu walked over side by side. When they saw this scene, they couldn't help but feel surprised. He had prepared such a sumptuous meal just for the person in front of them. They didn't have much impression of this person at all. Li Xian walked over and asked in confusion, "You know each other?" Li nodded. "Very familiar. Brother Jiang and I." Li Yi patted Jiang Xian's shoulder and said, "Our friends who have gone through life and death together." "Gone through life and death together," Li Xian murmured. When he looked at the young man, he immediately frowned. Li Yi pointed to the 2 people and introduced them to him. "This is the eldest princess, and this is Crown Prince Li Xian." The eldest princess was in power, and Crown Prince Li Xian was in charge of the Academy of Sciences. How could Jiang Xian not have heard of these 2 people? He hurriedly got up and saluted. "Greetings, eldest princess, greetings, your highness." Li looked at the woman in the next cell and asked, "This is..." Jiang Xian lowered his head and said, "This is my wife." Li Yi was surprised and said, "Brother Zian got married? When?" Jiang Zian said, "Just last year." Li Yi looked back at a jailer, and the jailer immediately understood. He hurriedly ran over, opened the cell door, and invited the woman over. "Zian, these people—" The woman still didn't know what had happened. She was nervous and whispered. Jiang Zian hurriedly introduced them. "This is Lord Li. This is the eldest princess, and this is Crown Prince." After another round of greetings, Jiang Zian and the woman didn't want to sit down at first. Li Yi persuaded them for a long time before they sat down nervously. Li Yi knew that Imingzhu and Li Xian must be full of doubts now, so he briefly described what happened in Shuzhou to them. Their friendship was real. If it weren't for Jiang Zian, he and Rui wouldn't have been able to leave the city safely, and naturally, there wouldn't have been such a thing in the future. After knowing the inside story, Li Xian looked at Jiang Zian without the dissatisfaction in his eyes. Li looked back at the official of the Supreme Court and asked, "What crime did he commit?" The official of the Supreme Court looked bitter and said, "He didn't commit any crime, but Lord Jiang is under the command of the king of Shu." Jiang Zian lowered his head. Sometimes, one didn't need a specific crime to be convicted. It was normal to be implicated by following the wrong person. He looked at Li Yi with a hint of hesitation on his face. After a long time, he said, "Lord Li, Jiang Zian deserved to die. But for the sake of our past relationship, can you save my wife? She is innocent, Zian." The woman held his hand and said with a solemn expression, "If you die, I will immediately follow you. Don't talk nonsense. I'm a member of the Jiang family in life and a ghost of the Jiang family in death. Then I will divorce my wife. At this point, it's too late for you to divorce." Li Yi's face was a little dark. He came over to reminisce about the old days, not to watch them show off their love. He coughed and said, "These years, Brother Zian has suffered under the command of the king of Shu." Jiang Zian raised his head, and a trace of confusion appeared on his face. The woman had already understood the meaning behind Li Yi's words. She knelt on the ground and said repeatedly, "Thank you, Lord Li, thank you, Lord Li." In the surrounding cells, the people smelled the fragrance and swallowed the rancid prison food. Although the last meal was delicious, they felt that the food that emitted the smell was even more delicious. That woman. What was the use of kowtowing? Could kowtowing be spared from the death penalty? At this moment, they only felt that if they could eat food like this in front of them for the rest of their lives, they would have nothing else to ask for. Chapter 9:32. Unlike the officials and nobles in the capital who had committed heinous crimes, the officials in Shuzhou who were implicated by the king of Shu were actually not all that evil. They might have plundered the wealth of the people and oppressed them, but their crimes did not warrant death. They could be spared from death, but their careers would probably be terminated. They would also suffer a lot of physical torture, which was inevitable. Although Li Yi and Jiang Zian once had some conflicts, that was a long time ago. When they were in Shuzhou, Jiang Zian had saved his and Rui's lives. Whether he was sincere or not, it was enough to let go of all the previous grievances. Seeing that Jiang Zian had fallen into such a situation, Li Yi couldn't just stand by and watch. There are still some procedures to go through with the Supreme Judiciary and the Secret Intelligence Department. I'm afraid that Brother Jiang will suffer a lot in the next 2 days. Li Yi stood up and looked at Jiang Zian, saying, "However, Brother Jiang will not suffer in vain. You have worked hard for the king of Shu for so many years, and the imperial court will definitely compensate you." Jiang Zian shook his head quickly, saying no. He was already very lucky to be able to walk out of here alive. He had never thought that he would not be implicated in this case and be restored to his post or even promoted. With the eldest princess here, everyone was very nervous and did not dare to say anything. After arranging Jiang Zian's affairs, Li Yi did not stay any longer and said goodbye to them. After Li Yi and the eldest princess left, an official of the Supreme Judiciary immediately changed his expression. He glared at several jailers beside him and said, Hey, you guys, what are your eyes doing? Hurry up and clean up this place for Mr. Jiang. No one had expected that there was such a person hidden in this group of criminal officials. He was a sworn friend of County Marquis Li and a spy hidden around the King of Shu. If he got out of here in the future, he would have a meteoric rise. Although he could not get Mr. Jiang out of here, it was still possible to improve the living environment of the prison cell. Here, clean this place up. Clean the bucket. Change the bucket every 2 hours and bring a new quilt over. Then he looked at the woman who was holding Jiang Darren's hand. He rolled his eyes and said, Jiang Darren, I'm really sorry. Recently, the prison has been tight. Why don't you and Madame Jiang stay in the same cell for the next 2 days? Jiang Zian could naturally feel the kindness of the official of the Supreme Judiciary. He nodded and said, Thank you very much, Your Excellency. The official of the Supreme Judiciary smiled and said, You are welcome. Very soon, the entire cell was clean and spotless. The single bed was replaced by a double bed. The quilt on the bed was also brand new. Even the cell was surrounded by curtains that could be drawn down at any time. It was like an independent little world. Beside the bed, the young woman held Jiang Zian's hand and asked in confusion, Husband, what's going on between you and Master Li? Jiang Zian sighed, and a trace of reminiscence appeared on his face. He said, It was an autumn day 3 years ago. I had just become a jinshi. I was full of passion and high spirits. That day, Prince Ning held a banquet in his manor and invited all the jinshi of Qing in prefecture. Then I met him, and then I was sent to the remote Shuzhou. Jiang Zian sighed and murmured, It's either a blessing or a misfortune. It's really hard to tell. In the other cells, everyone looked at the isolated area with envy. He really didn't expect the Supreme Court's heavenly prison to be so attentive. Not to mention the sumptuous last meal. There was actually such obvious preferential treatment. There was food, a bed, and a woman. This didn't seem like a prison. However, thinking that this might be his last day of enjoyment, no one envied him anymore. It was just a temporary happiness. Maybe tomorrow, he would have to face a knife on his head. They just put their ears to the wall and listened quietly. And listened. He still had to collect evidence with the people of the Supreme Court. These days, they ate and lived here. Li Yi and the other two went around the heavenly prison and walked out of the Supreme Court. The king of Shu ran away, and the Chui family is finished. It's really hard to accept. Li Xian sighed and asked, Mingzu, what should we do next? Mingzu walked with her head down and didn't respond. Li Xian looked back at her. Mingzu came back to her senses and looked at him. She nodded and said, Yes, you're right. Li Xian was stunned and asked doubtfully, What did I say just now? I still have some things to deal with. I'll go back to the palace first. Mingzu said and strode away. Li Xian looked at her back and touched his chin that didn't have a beard. He said, She has something on her mind. Li Yi counted on his fingers and said, Women have a few days every month. She'll be fine in a few days. Li Xian didn't continue this topic. He suddenly asked, Has your butt healed? Li looked back at him and said with a frown, My butt has always been fine. I saw it when I went to your house the other day. He shook his head and looked at Li Yi. He said pitifully, I think, compared to you taking her down, it'll be easier for her to take you down. Yunqi village was a village dozens of miles away from the capital. It relied on the mountains and the rivers. Yunqi village had its back to the mountains and water. The villagers mainly made a living by fishing and farming. Occasionally, they would go into the mountains to hunt and walk dozens of miles to the market in the capital to exchange for money. The rich people in the capital were very fond of the wild animals in the mountains. The village was remote and not close to the official road. For hundreds of years, the villagers of Yunqi village worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. Other than the daily buying and selling activities, they rarely interacted with the outside world. Of course, there were times when outsiders would pass by the village to rest and ask for a cup of water. The villagers usually didn't refuse. At this moment, under a large locust tree at the entrance of the village, a man wiped his mouth and praised, There are mountains and water. This place is good. In front of him, a villager smiled honestly and said, "In our hearts, this place can't even compare to the capital." After saying this, he waved his hand at an old man who walked in from outside and asked, "Old man Lou, did you go into the mountains again?" The old man's legs seemed to be ill, and he couldn't walk steadily. He had a bamboo basket on his back. He smiled and said, "I just picked some herbs. I didn't go very far." Watching the old man limp away, the villager smacked his lips and said, "Old Lou is also a pitiful man. He's old, and it wasn't easy for him to have a daughter. Once, when he went to the city, she was defiled by the young master of a powerful family in Jingdo. Later, the girl jumped into the river. Old Lou went to the yamen to seek justice, but his leg was broken. The old woman at home fell ill from anger and still hasn't recovered." The big man shook his head and said, "He is indeed pitiful. However, the court has a policy for old people like this to go to the medical center built by Her Highness the Eldest Princess. They don't need to pay to see the doctor, and they don't need to pick their own herbs. Everyone in our village remembers Her Highness's kindness. If it weren't for Her Highness's medical center, this old woman would have died long ago. However, picking herbs is not for his old woman. A few days ago, old man Lou picked up a person from the river. That person's hands and feet were all broken, and his body was badly burned. Old man Lou was picking herbs for him. The villager's expression became angry as he cursed. This F***king world. Good people really don't have good rewards. Good people don't live long, and evil people who do evil live more freely than anyone else." The big man finished drinking and patted him on the shoulder. He comforted him. "Good and evil will be rewarded. Heavens will reincarnate. Evil people will definitely get their retribution." In a dilapidated courtyard, just as the old man walked through the door, an old woman walked out and said excitedly, "He's awake, he's awake." The old man didn't have time to put down the medicine basket on his back. He limped into the house and came to the bed. A figure on the bed had already opened his eyes. There were large burns on his exposed skin, and most of his hair was burned. His limbs were strangely bent, and there was still a trace of trance in his eyes. The old man staggered over and said with a smile, "You're finally awake." The person on the bed said in a hoarse voice, "Did you save me?" The old man nodded. "Ah, yes, I found you by the river that day. Where's your house? I'll send someone to send a message." The man thought for a moment and said, "Help me send a message to Prime Minister Qin's residence. Tell him that Qin Yu is here. Remember, you must personally tell Prime Minister Qin this." The old man was stunned and asked with a trembling voice, Qin Yu?" After saying that, he seemed to think of something. He took a deep breath, looked at him, and asked, Are you the missing young Duke Qin? As long as you help me with this matter, I will definitely reward you generously in the future." The old man looked at him and asked, Are you really young Duke Qin?" The person on the bed didn't speak again. It was obvious that he had tacitly agreed. "Qin Yu, young Duke Qin." The old man closed his eyes, clenched his fists, and slowly loosened them. He put down the medicine basket on his back, turned his head, and whispered, "Old woman, go close the door." Not long after, outside the door, the big man scratched his head and said in surprise, "It's broad daylight. Why are you closing the door?" You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.